Just tell me when you're, go ahead, I'll just make sure I can do that. This one. Okay, I'm calling the appeal meeting to order. Today is February 10th, 2023 at 1 p.m. and this is an appeal of conditional use permit. And our agenda shows that we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance and an opening prayer, which I was not expecting to be on the agenda, but there it is. So let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Yes.
Before we start on the proceedings, I do have a motion to amend the agenda. And what I'd like to do is add under hearings A, between 2 and 3, the same thing we did in the previous hearing, was have an optional reply by the applicant limited to what was raised in response.
Any objection?
I don't understand where it's going.
Right here in letter A, between 2 and 3. Between, oh, what's that? There you go.
This is what you're.
Between number 2 and number 3. He was proposing that we make number 3 a 4, and that we add 3, which is a reply from the appellants to what was raised in the response / below. And that's what we have done in the previous appeal.
So we get a reply from the applicant.
Yes.
And we should have a reply to that.
I'm gonna start my motion. My motion is to do the same as we did in the previous hearing. But you can amend it, but I haven't got a second on my motion yet.
So you wanted to give a ring, I'll.
What I want to do is have, you've got a presentation by the appellant, then you've got a response by the permittee and the town staff. Then I want to have the optional reply by the appellant to anything that was raised by the town staff or permittee. And limit it to that. They can't raise anything new, but they can only respond to items that were in the response.
Yes, yeah, if I think if it on, I had to turn it back on.
I'm gonna say that. There.
Yes,
often related to the proposal to allow the other side to have the bubbles to be in that response back.
That'll be fine.
yeah, I'll second both motions. All in favor? Any objection? No, but it went off and I turned it back on. Whoa, who is that? Okay, so Paul made the motion and it was amended by Jean and I seconded it. So all in favor? Of the amendments? Aye. All right, so now on to the Pledge of Allegiance, and I had not expected an opening prayer, so Leroy, would you always have something ready in your back pocket?
Okay.
Okay, all right. Pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Okay, Leroy.
Our dear Father in heaven, we bow our heads humbly as we come to this appeal court and pray that thy spirit will be here, that justice for both parties might come to pass. We pray for thy guidance and for thy spirit. And we do this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay, so at this point, I have to call for declarations of conflict of interest. And I will be recusing myself. Do we need to go on?
Anybody else needs to call?
Okay.
Anyone else has?
Anyone else have a conflict of interest and plan to recuse themselves?
Mr. B, so the council, obviously, we have to be still open to questions for this.
Yeah, I think what you need to do is probably recuse yourself, and I would probably suggest that since you were the issuer of the permit, it's a subject matter, you're welcome to stay here and probably limit your comments to only questions that the council may ask of you as like a fact witness.
And does he just stay right there in his chair?
Probably if you would sit in there.
I'd love to sit down there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll recuse myself on those grounds. If anybody here, I'll recuse myself as a council member. I'll remain here as a zoning administrator in case I need your questions.
Okay, so I am leaving and I am turning this meeting over to Heath. And Heath is going to run the appeal meeting, and then when it moves on to item C, Leroy will take over as mayor pro tem.
And for the record, no conflict of interest.
No conflict of interest.
You have to move your microphone way close enough. All right,
and Leroy is acting pro tem.
yes.
Would you like me to go ahead and conduct the appeal hearing?
Yes, I'd like you to do that, please.
Sure.
Yeah. I got one right here.
All right.
Okay. Well, we would like to welcome the appellants and the permittee and their legal counsel present today. What we have, the appeal today for the council, and maybe just a little bit of background so that everyone can understand the procedural posture that we're in. Under our land use ordinances, and specifically chapter 16, which is the section on conditional uses, it indicates that a conditional use permit can be appealed. And instead of delegating the appeal authority to our standard appeal authority, and under Utah code, you can have different appeal authorities for different types of land use applications. the appeal authority has been delegated to the council. Reason being is that under our ordinances, there are two types of conditional use permits. There's a level 1 conditional use permit that is issued by the zoning administrator, and there's a level 2 conditional use permit that is issued by the planning commission. In both instances, the council, as the legislative or governing body of the town, has delegated that land use authority to two different bodies, depending on the type of conditional use permit. As such, they have the ability to hear appeals of the issuances of those permits. So that as a council, that's what you're doing today. I will tell you that obviously we have a quorum present, we had a quorum present to start the meeting, even with the recusals that we still have a quorum. We have 3 of 5 voting members of the council here present. It will require a majority of the quorum to reach any sort of decision. So I also want to explain to you a little bit, because this is the only situation I can see in our ordinances where the council acts as the appeal authority. Normally, it's delegated to that body that is known as the appeal authority, and then under our ordinances, we've chosen to have a single person body, and we have retained the services of a land use attorney who is not affiliated with the town, Bruce Jenkins, and he normally hears appeals of decisions. Any of your decisions as a council, if someone who was adversely affected to appeal that, your decision would be appealed to the appeal authority. But today you are the appeal authority. And under state code, the appeal authority has the ability to hear variances, which that would be Mr. Jenkins' job also. But today, under our section on the appeal authority, we have to comply with the same standards. And so we have to make findings, first of all, that an appeal was timely made. And I'm going to read the requirements from 6.12 of our ordinances, that it was timely made by an adversely affected person. And we can go back and discuss each one of these. The appeal authority has to determine the correctness of the decision of the land use authority. So we're determining the correctness of the zoning administrator's decision to issue the conditional use permit. That's the standard of review. And elsewhere I'm going to talk about, it is not a all new review. We are reviewing what the zoning administrator, his decision. We don't get the right to look at it all new, which would be what we would call a de novo review. We have to look at what was applied for and what permitting for the project already had in the past, and whether there is substantial evidence in the record. And that's kind of the thing that I want to tell you. We're trying to determine whether the planning administrator acted correctly, his decision was correct, and it has to be based on substantive evidence in the record. The other few points I want to make is that you can only hear an appeal of a land use decision. And I would tell you that the issuance of conditional use permit is clearly that. So I think that that element has been met. All documents and exhibits constituting the record upon which the action was appealed shall be presented to the town clerk with the application for the hearing. We do need to probably have a discussion about that as we go along, and as we let the appellant make their presentation, because at least as I read it this morning, there is an indication that they were trying to request and obtain additional documents that wasn't submitted at the time of their appeal. The applicants or the appellants, you have to realize that under our 6.12, they have to present all theories of error that they would want to raise if this matter were to go to district court. There appears to be two narratives, and there are a couple different theories, and we can talk about that when they make their presentation. The other thing that I want all of us to understand, is that they have the burden of proof today. So I think that's an important concept that you as council members need to appreciate, is that the appellants have the burden, they have to carry that. The burden is not on the town to show that the zoning administrator did not make an error. The burden is on the appellants to prove that he did. So that's a key, and that tracks what state law says about appeals too. Our ordinance on appeals is pretty close to almost word for word what the state statute says. We need to respect the due process rights of each of the participants. So that would include, in this situation, the appellants, their right to be heard, their right to have legal counsel present if they want, and then the permittee, who they're the subject or they're the recipient of the permit that's being challenged. And so they have the right to be present, to make a rebuttal or response. They have the right to have legal counsel present, and it looks like they've done that. And then it says that we need to issue a written decision within a reasonable time after the hearing. We have the ability, and under our agenda, if at the conclusion of the presentation and our questioning of the parties, we want to go into an executive session to discuss and deliberate, we can do that, come back in, or ask the parties to come back in, and we can issue an oral decision today. However, we are going to need to have a written decision, and their ability to appeal that decision, either side, depending on the outcome, is triggered when that written decision is issued. So that's kind of the rules for today. Seeing those kind of requirements, is there any discussion that the council wants to have before we proceed?
I'd like to make a proposal that we decline this appeal application based on the applicants are not an affected party by the Utah State Code, and it's code 10-9 A-103 under definitions. That reads, if I can read it to you, adverse affected party means a person other than a land use applicant who owns real property adjoining the property that is subject of a land use application or land use decision, will suffer a damage different in kind than or an injured district from that of the general community as a result of the land use decision. And then our own codes, when we decide if something's going to affect someone, it's within 300 feet of the property line. So our own codes kind of match this. And I do not see where these people who have applied for this appeal are live with close to the property or are adversely affected other than any other citizen in the town.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion, any thought by other council members on that motion?
I'd like to hear your weigh in on that as our attorney.
I would ask Leroy, do you have the reference on when that was adopted and became effective?
Read the state code?
Yeah,
No, I don't.
that's a recent change. Mr. Eakins?
I have that information if it would be helpful. In terms of timing of.
Yeah, this is a procedural question. It's not, we haven't got into the meat of the hearing, and it's what I would refer to in a proceeding like this as a preemptory type request that's being made. I think probably we need to appreciate standing. Paul, as an attorney, I think you can appreciate this situation. Do you feel like we need to address standing before we get into the merits? I've got a motion. I don't know where to go with that. I do know that's a new section of the Utah
Yeah,
code.
you can deal with either way. You can deal with it as preliminary basis, or you can deal with it as the whole process of things.
Okay.
That's kind of what we did last time. We let the parties make their decision and then we dealt with it. in the process. And so,
Okay.
yeah, either way is all right. So far, I haven't heard a second to his motion.
No, there has not been a second to the motion. Misty asked for some feedback from me as the town's attorney. What I'd rather do since I'm conducting, and this is slightly out of order, but it is because it's a preemptory motion that's been made by a council member. Do you want to give the background? Because my understanding is that is a fairly new addition to the Utah code, because there's been issues on throughout the state on who is an adversely affected party.
If that would be our cancel.
Yeah, if we can keep it brief, that would be great.
Yeah, in short, 2020 is when that definition came into play. Prior to 2020, there was a definition for an adversely affected owner, as in property owner, or an adversely affected entity, but there was nothing related to a definition as to a party. So in 2020, what was just read barely in terms of an adversely affected party is when that became law in statute.
July 15th, after legislative session.
I don't have the particular effective date.
I
but just
think
May or
that's
July.
my understanding, just generally is, and so it's been in place for about a year and a half.
Correct.
Do you have a minute for me to say why I want to do this? I feel that we are setting a bad precedent by letting an appeal for land use or land decision when they are not an affected party by state code or by virgin town codes. This will open what you might call Pandora's box and cost the town significantly on any land use decision made by the zone administrator. And we could be paid for the appeal on everything. And, you know, this appeal is going to cost the town significantly in attorney fees already. And I just feel that we're setting a bad precedent when we're letting people that are not affected by it over any other citizen in the town.
So if I do a second, then we can have some discussion, correct?
Mhm.
To discuss, because we've got to finish the motion. Right?
Yeah, or it dies.
Or it
Just
dies.
Move on.
So we can have some more discussion after,
Mhm.
because, I'll second the motion so we can have some discussion and take a
Okay.
vote on that after discussion.
Okay.
So I was not prepared for that.
Let me tell you this, Misty, kind of in response to your question, we have a definition, or we do not have a specific definition. Excuse me, we do not have a specific definition of an adversely affected party in our own ordinances. That what's been cited by Mr. Thompson and discussed by Mr. Eakins here is a creature of state law. Now, if we did, and we had something that was contrary to it, I would tell you, as the town's attorney, the doctrine of preemption, state law preempts. If there is something specifically on point in state law and our ordinances are contrary to it, the state law controls. That's the doctrine of preemption. It's throughout Utah case law, municipal case law here in the state of Utah. So, and I would tell you in this discussion, it sounds to me like the reason why I asked you have legislative sessions, usually laws get enacted and, or they get passed and there is an enactment date. And usually if it's in the spring legislative session, the enactment is July 15th. That's why I was trying to understand if at the time the conditional use permit was issued and the time the appeal was made, was this state statute in place? Because if frankly, if it was something that came into effect and it had a January 1 or a January 15th of this year effective date, then we might have a different response. That's all the feedback that I can give you. If you guys would like to have further discussion, any comment?
I understand the unusual procedural nature, but during the discussion, I'd ask both parties to have a chance to make a brief statement on this, because really, if we're getting to a standing argument, I would keep it short and detailed, but maybe a minute or two for each party to make a comment on the discussions here.
Yeah, I guess I will do that. It is important. I'm going to, I'm not gonna call for the question. It has been, and as a matter of further discussion, I'm going to allow, we could just limit it to like 2 minutes to both sides to give their input. I definitely think that the council needs to hear from the appellants why they think they are adversely affected. And maybe there is some points that they can raise that maybe we haven't thought through either. So I'll allow, Mr. Eakins, you to go first.
I'm sorry, is it out of order to ask, not have the appellant go first?
Well, if you'd like, I'm giving you the last say.
I'm fine if they go first.
Go ahead.
No, I understand your question. And if you want to go first and give them the last say, I'd be happy to. What?
I have 15 minutes prepared my presentation about standing,
Oh,
so I'm very prepared to discuss the standing issue. And I'd like to be able to discuss it. I think it would be totally unfair if we were not allowed to present our case based upon a standing question. I haven't even been able to raise the arguments.
and I appreciate that. Based on that request, I'm gonna ask, does the council want to defer vote on that motion and defer it to the end after presentation of the parties' arguments?
I actually think that we should hear, I mean, we could have a lot of work and effort, so.
Saying
We're here for
that we're
that.
taking no action on it. Paul. I want to give everybody their due
Yeah.
process, right?
Yeah, obviously, what you could end up doing is trying to make that decision halfway through and cutting the proceeding short, but I'd as soon take it under advisement, the whole thing, because that will give us a clear picture as to whether they meet the definition or not. Once they get the presentation done. It's gonna require us to keep that in mind and it'll take a little bit more time, but we're here. And that's gonna have to be one of the bases, and we take this under advisement.
Leroy, what do you think?
No, that's fine, it's for them to make a presentation, as long as my proposal does not die.
Okay.
Can we defer it? I was.
Yeah, I'm going to, he's the person who made the motion. And I think what I will do then is I won't call for the question on that, but I will defer. And we're going to allow the parties to proceed. We will, in making our decision, that motion will be, and the issue of standing will be part of the determination.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, let's, from the agenda, we will first hear presentation of the grounds and evidence by the appellant. And then we will allow a response or rebuttal by the permittee of the subject condition use permitted of the comment.
Thank you.
Point of clarification, sorry. Are we just focusing on the standing issue first and it'll be decided? And if standing is found, and we continue to hear evidence on the remainder?
It is one point to be made in the overall.
Amongst everything?
Yeah.
I request that we decide you want standing first. After the presentation's made and focus on that subject.
Sure.
And then if they have standing, then we continue on other subjects. That's a request I've been made in terms of the process today. That's going to reflect the intent of Councilmember Thompson in terms of.
And because that would adjust the agenda and the structure, he's asking for a bifurcation of the hearing on the issue of standing first, allowing presentation of unlimited time. So it would be the process prescribed in A, but it's A in 1, in 2, and 3. On the issue of standing only, we would basically create a new B, which funny enough, the agenda doesn't have a B on it. It has A, C, and D. And we have this newfound B, and it would be the same thing on all the rest of the issues, okay? So if that's what the council wants to do, I would like a motion to amend the agenda to do that. And if I can get that second and voted on, we can move real quickly through that.
So we're just gonna discuss standing first.
Yeah, to bifurcate on the issue of standing and create, move everything in A down to B and make A the same format on the issue of standing only. You can say so moved if you want. Or.
Give us a minute to,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, it's,
sorry, we attorneys,
you're fasting.
I apologize.
Word of the day, bifurcate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it just means split it up into segments and taking one first and the rest of
Described
it
it
second.
wrong.
Mr. Snell, my presentation is largely focused on standing for the first portion of the presentation. But I think without being able to summarize, I fear my presentation will not be complete. So I'm afraid that would be unfair to the appellants if we were not able to complete our entire statements. We're not attorneys.
Yeah.
And we prepared, but we can't fly off the handle very well.
Well appreciated. And again, I'm not going to make the bifurcation. I'm only sharing this. I'm not a voting member and I've had it delegated to me by the mayor pro tem and our mayor has recused herself. So I'm gonna, if they want to bifurcate, they'll need to make a motion to do that. They've heard your comment.
And I appreciate that. That was one of my concerns. What we have is two individuals, talented that are not lawyers. We have a lawyer on the other side, which is permitted. And so a lot of times we're dealing with per se, if you were in a court of law, usually a judge will give a little leeway to per se litigants. They still have to comply with statute, but give a little leeway in the presentation. And that's what I would be saying, because sometimes it becomes clearer once you go all the way through the presentation. And I know in court proceedings, a lot of times the court will take that under advisement and hear the whole thing and then make the decision. So I don't think it's out of the ordinary if we wait. If we bifurcate, then we'll deal with it at that time. But I'm not gonna make the motion, so we'll have to be up to Leroy or Misty to make it.
I'm not gonna make it, unfortunately. I feel like we're not fortunate, unfortunately, fortunately, I feel like you guys should be allowed to do diligence, so I'm. As long as we're taking it from the advisor.
I'm. Get a second. That sounds to me like Leroy's heard the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and proceed as the agenda sets forth. I do note the typo, we're gonna proceed with A and A1, specifically the presentation of grounds and evidence by the appellants. So go ahead and take your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is it gonna be all presented by you or is it gonna be?
No, it'll be
presented by
split.
both?
It'll be split. Lauren Campbell and April McCallum are here today to appeal the conditional use permit on parcel 7 issued to Zion Sunset on December 22nd, 2022. Our application was filed with the town clerk within 15 days of the termination date and the fees paid with the application. Both McCallum and I are legal residents of the town of Virgin. We're providing each of the appeals board members, town attorney and applicant, a copy of our statement. And because many questions may be answered later in our statement, we request that we be able to complete our statement before any questions are posed. There are two key legal issues in having a land use decision overturned. One, do Campbell and McCallum have standing as potentially adversely affected and aggrieved parties in the conditional use permit? And two, was the issued conditional use permit arbitrary, capricious, or illegal? We will establish both of these facts. I'd like to go ahead and pass out our complete statement so that everybody has a copy of it. If you need to ask questions, please note the questions as we go through the statement and then ask if it begins to get through our statement.
I'm gonna ask a question. Was this submitted at the time of the appeal?
No, it was not. This is not our narrative that we sent in with the appeal.
And is this a summary of the arguments that you're going to make?
This is
Today.
all of the arguments that I'm going to make.
Is there, it references, I'm seeing some highlights that appear to be slide.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, or what are those documents?
You should have slides, those will be in the overhead. They're displayed now, and then you should have that after the appeal document, after the appeal statement.
Keep this in your folder.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm asking is that, are these slides all part of what was submitted?
No, those slides were presented, were prepared to go with our arguments today. In support of our arguments.
Okay, so they're more demonstrative. Okay, I'm chairing the meeting. I don't know that we'll make. We appreciate the handout, whether or not the council needs to take any or great weight in the contents of it. Go ahead and proceed with your presentation.
Okay. I'm going to repeat, there are two key legal questions, two legal issues in having a land use decision overturned. Do Campbell and McCowan have standing as potentially adversely affected and aggrieved parties in the CUP? And two, was the issued CUP arbitrary, capricious, or illegal? We will establish both of these facts. When determining standing, let's first look at VULU. VULU 1604 F4 states for a level 1 review, the applicant, town, or previously identified affected party may appeal any decision to the town council within 15 days of determination. The term previously identified affected party is not defined and is unclear, but I can assure you that I have been previously identified many times. For example, at birth and many other times, like when I get on an airplane or re-enter the country. Further, there are no other parties, especially from the public, that are involved in the CUP application as a level 1 review. This term is vague and thus may be considered unconstitutional. I'm not sure what the term really means, so let's look at VULU 1608A, which restates the right of the CUP holder to repeal the decision. So that is not relevant. VULU 6 discusses the town's independent appeal authority, which is also not applicable in this case. Since VULU is not clear about what a previously identified affected party is, let's examine other precedent. One, there is precedent established in the town of Virgin by an appeal that was filed by Bonnie Timmerman versus the town of Virgin, with Matthew Eakins acting as the appeal authority. I might also like to note that counsel for the town of Virgin was Heath Snow, and counsel for Ms. Timmerman was Jason Smith. This appeal mirrors our case exactly. In that appeal, the town of Virgin contested that Mrs. Timmerman had no standing to challenge the CUP decision. The town also argued there is no specific harm or injury that Mrs. Timmerman could identify as grounds for legal standing. It is well settled that to have a personal stake in the outcome of a land use decision, a party must own or occupy property within the jurisdiction of the decision-making body. And I've cited all the cases. I'm not going to read those for sake of brevity. The appeal application filed by Mrs. Timmerman confirmed she was a resident of the town of Virgin, 163 South Rulon Road, Virgin, Utah, which is a distance of 1.5 miles from White Bison. For land use decisions, standing only requires the allegation of an adverse effect. As a condition precedent to a judicial review of a land use decision, an adversely affected person may file a challenge within 15 days. Under VULU 8, which has been changed, now the applicant or any other person aggrieved by the decision or action may appeal the decision on an application for a conditional use permit. Here, Mrs. Timmerman's allegation that she is harmed by the CUP decision satisfies the precondition for judicial review. Mrs. Timmerman has standing to challenge the CUP decision. There is sufficient evidence that Mrs. Timmerman is a resident of Virgin, has an interest in use and enjoyment of her property, and the CUP decision sufficiently affected her as an adversely and aggrieved person to find she has standing under Chapter 3 and Chapter 8 of the old Blue Code. The facts were almost identical in our appeal today, so this ruling clearly establishes that we both have standing to appeal as a potentially aggrieved party.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
If I can, like I've indicated, I'm only chairing the meeting, but I will ask for the benefit of the council so that they can understand. And I think we're going to conduct this meeting essentially like you would see in any sort of appeal proceeding. You're welcome to continue, but I'm gonna ask, I may stop you, or any other council member may stop you and ask you questions, just so that we can understand. The question I had here was the timing, the date on the Timmerman appeal, and the Timmerman decision by the town's appeal authority.
I've attached a complete copy of that appeal authority decision in your packet. I believe it was July of 2019.
Okay, so that would have predated the date when we've had the change in the state code on adversely affected party.
Yes.
Go ahead, please proceed.
The four establishments are, we are natural persons that live in the same jurisdiction in the town of Virgin. 2, we are making an allegation that because the CUP was issued arbitrarily, capriciously, and illegally, that the CUP harmed us. 3, we both have an interest in use and enjoyment of our property. And 4, our appeal was filed in accordance with Lulu. We also have standing under the public interest standing doctrine, which states if a party does not have traditional standing, a party may gain standing upon showing 1, the appropriate party has brought suit. This appeal is a form of suit required by Lulu and before suit is filed in district court. And 2, the dispute raises an issue of significant public importance. The town should not be allowed to arbitrarily obey the ordinances they enacted. Goes on to say a party is an appropriate party to bring suit if 1, the party is competent to effectively assist the court in developing and reviewing the relevant legal and factual questions. While we are not attorneys, we have a strong layman's perspective on understanding law and explaining facts to others. 2, the issue is unlikely to be raised if the party is denied standing. If we are denied standing, the issue of arbitrary, capricious, and unequal application of the law will continue, affecting others in the future. And 3, the issue is not more appropriately addressed by another branch of government. We are only seeking that the ordinance be followed, not a new ordinance.
Mr. Campbell, just another question I had for you. This case that you're referring to, Jenkins v. Swan, do you know what the background is on, what kind of challenge was this public interest doctrine involved? Was it a constitutional issue?
No, it was a land use issue. I do not have that copy with me.
Okay.
I did read quite a bit of the language, but it was a land use issue.
Because I'm very familiar with the public interest doctrine, and that public interest groups can have standing if it relates to constitutional questions of constitutionality of a law or doctrine, but I didn't know with regards to land use. So I'll have to read that.
I have, the public interest doctrine has also been upheld by numerous other precedent-setting cases, such as Jenkins v. Swan and Supreme Court of Utah, and I've got the citation there. We meet all the criteria required under the public interest doctrine. Further, we are adversely affected and aggrieved parties because we and the entire town are harmed when the town creates, obeys, or enforces ordinances and rulings arbitrarily, capriciously, or illegally. If the town is allowed to choose the laws they will want to obey, there is no assurance that other ordinances or laws will be equally applied to all individuals in all cases. Would it be okay to manipulate elections in order to win? Of course not. The rule of law is based on the principle that all citizens and institutions within a country, state, or community are accountable to the same laws, including lawmakers and leaders. We have standing because it is a reasonable expectation that the ordinances and laws will be applied equally to all persons, without which our property values, use and enjoyment are harmed, and confidence in government is diminished as the future becomes uncertain. We are adversely affected and aggrieved parties because over the past several years, Zion Sunset has caused aggravation, financial damage, and health risk to Virgin residents due to wind blowing sand from the project throughout and across Virgin Town. The contractor decimated all natural vegetation on the land and has not provided the required dust control. We, along with many other residents, have spent considerable amounts of money in additional property maintenance and pool cleaning expenses caused by the storm of sand coming from the cleared and barren land from Zion Sunset. There are no provisions contained in the CUP to mitigate and protect Virgin residents, including ourselves. This makes us both adversely affected and aggrieved parties. We are adversely affected and aggrieved parties because Utah Code 524102, Declaration of Public Policy, states in part, it is the intent of the legislature that the state, its agencies, and its political subdivisions, A, take their actions openly, and B, conduct their deliberations openly. The decision behind the CUP was done in private, without any opportunity for the public to comment on the largest project in Virgin Town's history. When a backroom deal is struck on a major decision, doubt and suspicion of the public is almost inevitable, even when there is no malfeasance. When the town deviates against its own land use regulations, that makes every resident of Virgin, including us, adversely affected and aggrieved persons. Just look to the next slide. So we have standing as aggrieved parties and under both traditional and alternative standards. I will now cite more from the Timmerman versus Town of Virgin appeal ruling supporting the reason the CUP should be overturned. For this CUP decision to be overturned, it must be shown to be arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. That was in Green versus Brown. A land use authority's decision is arbitrary or capricious only if it is not supported by substantial evidence in the record. That was Pacific West Communities versus Bransfield. Substantial evidence is that quantum and quality of relevant evidence that is adequate to convince a reasonable mind to support a conclusion. In determining whether substantial evidence supports the City Council's decision, we will consider all the evidence in the record, both favorable and contrary, and determine whether a reasonable mind could reach the same conclusion as the City Council. An arbitrary and capricious decision is not supported by substantial evidence, which is that quantum and quality of relevant evidence that is adequate to convince a reasonable mind to support a conclusion. Here, the evidence demonstrates the Town Council's decision was the result of sufficient evidence related to the application, plans, planning and zoning commission meetings and recommendations, comments from the public, and adjustments made in the application process. Accordingly, a reasonable mind could have reached the same decision of the Town Council based on the record. The CUP decision was not arbitrary or capricious. Mrs. Timmerman lost the appeal on the grounds that the town's records had sufficient evidence in the record to establish that the CUP decision was not arbitrary or capricious. Additionally, all the process required under town ordinances were followed. So the appeal authority found that it was not illegal, thus she lost the appeal. Our case today mirrors Timmerman, giving us standing as adversely affected and aggrieved persons. But our case differs from Timmerman because today, April McCown will prove that CUP was capricious, arbitrary, and illegal.
My turn. Can we put that next slide up, please? Okay.
First, let's review the definition used in a few precedents to clearly establish the law requiring the CUP to be overturned. For a CUP decision to be overturned, it must be shown to be arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. A land use decision is arbitrary and capricious if the land use decision is not supported by substantial evidence in the record.
of the Utah Code. Determination of the legality requires a determination that this decision violates a law, statute, or ordinance in effect at the time the decision was made. Another Utah Code. The approval of the CUP by the zoning administrator could be void. See Carter versus Salina. Under Utah Code, approvals which do not comply with statutory notice and procedural requirements are void. Allowing an applicant to submit a last-minute application prevents the public from being adequately notified of the nature of the approval being considered. This violates the principle of public notice, and public bodies should not consider application until complete information is made available to the public. Quotes taken from the Utah Office of Property Rights Ombudsman, Advisory Opinion 81.
Ms. McCown, if I could ask you a couple of questions as we go along here, so that I understand, you're saying that it's arbitrary and capricious because it's contrary to law. What law was violated by the zoning administrator by issuing the conditional use permit in question?
So we'll go on to show that, and talk about Hulu 16.04 and show how all the application fee was not submitted correctly. Sure.
There were 24 violations of Zulu ordinance in this CUP decision. Would you like us to go through all 24 of them now? Or?
We're going to need to at some point.
We will.
Okay, we will.
Okay.
We will.
Okay, substantial evidence is the quantum and quality of relevance evidence that is adequate to convince a reasonable mind to support a conclusion. In determining whether substantial evidence supports the city council's decision, we will consider all the evidence in the record, both favorable and contrary, and determine whether a reasonable mind will reach the same conclusion as the city council. An arbitrary and capricious decision is not supported by substantial evidence, which is that quantum and quality of relevant evidence that is adequate to convince a reasonable mind to support a conclusion. So now let's review the flat facts. On slide number 4, Rule 16.04 contains specific requirements for application and review regulating conditional use permits. A, the application and the application fee was not submitted to the town clerk until January 5th, 2023, almost 2 weeks after the CUP was signed. This is a direct violation of the process, procedure, and ordinance for obtaining a conditional use permit.
April, are you aware that the applicant for the CUP had made an appointment with the town clerk, and when he arrived for that appointment, the mayor had asked the town clerk to close the office because we didn't have power to the office? But she could have accepted that application at that time, and she didn't, under direction of the mayor. That's what I understand happened.
I'm not sure that that's exactly the facts, but I do know that there was no time limit for the developer to place that application at that date.
What do you mean by no time limit?
As far as the Zion,
Can I ask a question? What was the date of that supposed appointment?
I believe it was the 22nd of December.
And that was the same date the CUP was issued
and Zion,
and signed,
Right.
but the fees were not paid, or it was
The fees were given to the loan administrator, and it wasn't given to the clerk because she was asked to leave.
So we'll go on to review more of 1604. The 1604 says that the application and fees must be done before the zoning administrator even sees the application.
And-
We'll detail that.
and also that application needs to be reviewed by the town council. We'll go on by the town staff, okay? Okay, so where was I? Okay, because the application was submitted in this manner, it was impossible for the application to be reviewed by the town staff for completeness as required by Rule 16.04D.
Mr. McCown, who do you believe town staff is?
I think the town staff is probably Crystal.
It wouldn't include the town zoning administrator?
It doesn't say specifically in the ordinance, so it's not very clear.
Okay.
Are you aware that it's always been conducted as the loan administrator as part of the town staff when he accepted his CUP?
That's fine. You could take that. But guess what? It wasn't complete. The application was not complete, and I intend to tell you exactly why.
Okay, well, the application, I understand, wasn't complete because the clerk was asked to leave.
It doesn't matter. Whatever they submitted, even on the 15th, was not complete, and I intend to outline why.
Understand?
Okay. Okay, the application.
Sorry, Leroy, have you already made a decision on this?
No, I haven't.
Okay, very good.
I'm just bringing up facts that I have been told.
You're
Okay.
bringing up your thing.
Well, here's,
Somebody told you that somebody else told you.
okay,
That's not a fact.
we'll just continue on because these are the facts. The application was submitted after the CUP was approved and the application was also incomplete.
When you say submitted, you mean
Handed
handed to the clerk?
to the clerk.
And is that what the ordinance says?
Yes.
Okay. This, we'll make
It
sure.
needs to be submitted prior to the conditional use application being approved.
Would there be circumstances where it would not, it could, if. What about, I know that we have limited hours in the town. What are the hours, Crystal? 10?
Hours for public are 9 to Monday to Thursday.
Okay, so if it was Friday, I'm just gonna ask this question. Please don't take any question that I ask or anybody else asks. I want to conduct this like you would get asked the same questions if we all had big black robes on and we were in Salt Lake, and there's gonna be a pretty building up on the 4th floor in Matheson Courthouse. But what, Ms. McCown, how would someone submit that when if the office was closed or if the clerk wasn't present?
Let me ask a rhetorical question.
Well,
How could someone submit an application on the 22nd of December and have a signed CUP, an approved CUP signed the same day? How does that allow the zoning administrator to do the required background investigation of that CUP application in
the need,
An hour.
that's an argument that you can make and you have the burden to do it. And asking me questions isn't gonna.
Okay.
So.
All right. Good point.
So. The application was submitted after the CUP was approved and the application was also incomplete because it is Rule 16.04A indicates that number one, the contact information has to be on the CUP. You can see the application up on the board. They did complete the contact information. A development plan is required. There was no development plan included in the application. A written description or narrative, they said hotel motel. Clearly, these units do not fit the description of a hotel motel. Also, number 4 is an estimate of the number of employees is required. That item was not completed. Number 5, an estimate of the time required for construction. That item was not completed. A listing of all utilities which will be placed. That item was not completed. This application consisted of what you see on the board. That's it. It does not fulfill the requirements of Rule 16.04A.
Which I might add, are all preceded by the word shall, which makes them mandatory.
Question I had as I read your prior narrative that you submitted with the appeal was, it could, my understanding is that there was a site plan issued. And are any of those items, are they addressed in the site plan and in notes or notations or anything like that? And can,
No, I am just telling you what is required in the application right now.
so are you saying that the site plans were not attached with the application?
There was nothing in the application except what you see right here on the board. That's it.
To clarify, the site plan was only attached to the CUP. It was never attached to the application.
Which you're asserting was issued the same day, and how would the zoning administrator have it if it wasn't submitted with the application?
Actually, I'm saying the application was submitted 2 weeks after the CUP was approved and signed.
And when you're saying submitted, you mean given to the clerk?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, oh, item number 7, also through 16.04, but other information relevant to the project, there was nothing submitted on that either. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, number 5.
I think that-
Okay. Additionally, the application acknowledgement and agreement was not dated or notarized. You can see, well. Actually.
Yeah, it's just there.
I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah.
There's a little town use section.
Yeah.
And it says that it's supposed to be filled out. Go back one slide. See that dark, that, okay. That was not even filled out at all, nothing.
And that violated Hulu?
Yes.
1604?
Part of the form,
Well, that's a form how to implement Hulu. But does that violate 1604 of Hulu?
Yes, one of the first steps, and we'll go through this, one of the first steps that the zoning administrator, once he gets the application, is to verify the level of the application.
Yeah.
That is a requirement, and the specific order is intended to follow a process. The town clerk is supposed to have time to review the application for completeness. When it's not complete, it should have been returned to the applicant for further review. The fact that a CUP was issued the same day that the application was supposedly signed defies logic.
okay, well, so the application acknowledgement agreement was not dated or notarized. The zoning administrator did not complete any portion of the town use only section on the second page, which requires the CUP level designation or an approval or denial section and signature section.
So should have that been done at the time or prior to submittal to the clerk?
No, no, I think the process is that the clerk accepts the application, the zoning administrator
So
reviews it.
this is done, that gray box is done afterwards.
I would say after he has the chance to review the application.
After it's been submitted
Yes,
to the clerk.
yes.
Making sure, I want to make sure council
I
follows.
think everybody agrees with that and the town, that that's the process that needs to happen. All right. The action of the zoning administrator in evaluating and approving the CUP is illegal because Bulu 16.04 was not followed. The approval of the CUP by the zoning administrator should be void. See Carter versus Salina, and there, which do not comply with statutory notice and procedural requirements are void under Utah law. Allowing an applicant to submit a last-minute application prevents the public from being adequately notified of the nature of the approval being considered. This violates the principle of public notice and public bodies should not consider applications until complete information is made available to the public. Quotes taken from the Utah Office of Property Rights Ombudsman Advisory Opinion 81. Okay, so then Lulu 16.04-E-1 states the determination of conditional use level is vested solely in the zoning administrator, who shall look at the following 6 factors, such as type of use. The type of use in the application only indicates it's for hotel motel and does not reflect many of the specified permissions contained in the CUP. The project does not qualify as a hotel motel. The floor plans included in the CUP indicate that the structures will consist of 200, 1,360 to 1,530 square foot short-term rental units, which include 3 to 4 bedrooms, 2 to 3 full bathrooms, a full kitchen, and a laundry room. It is completely ridiculous to suggest that these structures can in any way be classified as a hotel motel. They are condominiums. The proposed use of condominiums is not allowed in any zone in Virgin Town. The project scope and size is the largest project ever constructed in Virgin Town. As permitted, it consists of 200 short-term rentals, which will add approximately 30% more to the current population of Virgin, and use 50% of the town's remaining water hookups. I actually put in the packet early on a calculation of the water requirements, which was in your packets previously. I don't want to go over the calculations, but they were confirmed by 3 other independent engineers. 200 hookups out of the remaining 400 hookups that Virgin Town currently has. So let's see, Lulu 16.22.C-3 states that lodging density shall not be more than 12 units per acre. By this standard, the parcel at issue here, which is 7.88 acres, would allow 94 to 95 units, not 200. Lulu 16.22.4B allows for a lodging density bonus of up to 15 units per acre. At 7.88 acres, this yields a density bonus of a maximum of 118 units, not 200, as specified in the CUP. Go to slide 6. This table attached to the CUP as Exhibit B shows the maximum number of lodging units at 16 per acre, and also increased the acreage from 7.88 acres to 12.5 acres. There is no explanation of justification for why the increase to 16 was made from Lulu, which only allows 15. Then we have slide 7. Additionally, the increase in acreage appears to have been accomplished by taking 4.52 acres from parcel 10, which is designated as open space. This presents another problem as parcel 10 sits in the floodplain as identified by FEMA. Lulu's 16.22.6C.4 states land that is undevelopable based on the site standards of this chapter, or because of laws and ordinances that prohibit development in certain areas, floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, and drainage ways shall be excluded from the development yield analysis. Thus, parcel 10 is not eligible to be included as a development yield table. Lodging units on parcel 7 are limited to 7.88 acres and is either 95 or 118 units, not 200 units. Lulu 16.22.C.4 states that in no event shall building coverage exceed 33% of parcel acreage. But it is impossible to tell from the documents attached to the CUP if this requirement has been considered or properly applied. Hulu 44.12 requires that no contiguous parking area may be more than 100 feet long. Shade trees may be required in larger lots as determined in design conditional use review. Many of the parking segments are 2 to 3 times that length on both sides of the street, and there are very few shade trees indicated in the parking area. Bulu 16.22.c.2 requires 1 parking spot for each lodging unit plus 1 per employee. There is no estimate of the number of employees, therefore it is unable to determine the required number of spaces. Further, the number of available parking spaces is not shown on the site plan or the application. Possible adverse effects. There is no evidence of the following possible adverse effects in mitigation to those effects in the town record required by Bulu 16.18. Where are the mitigating factors applied in granting the CUP? There are no details in the town records about any considerations of these possible adverse actions. Bulu 16.18 states the following standards must be used to establish 27 listed conditions, possibly mitigate these concerns. The following 11 standards are not addressed in the CUP. Number 1, controlled outdoor storage. Number 2, requiring proper sewer connections or treatments, demanding proper disposal of solid waste, abandoned or discarded property, and safety hazards. Controlling dust or other types of air pollution, requiring planting on ground cover to control dust, runoff, and erosion, enforcing necessary standards for the protection of watershed, controlling the disposal of hazardous materials, lighting, dark sky, aesthetics, noise, and landscaping. There are also other potential adverse conditions not mentioned, including the impact on water connection and bond requirements to ensure completion of the project. Part D, construction of new buildings and structures are obviously involved, but there's no details on this building. Possible conflicts with the town's general plan. Bulu 44.14a specifies that building heights are limited to 25 feet unless bonus height is granted in a CUP. Bonus height is not defined in Bulu, but it's a defined ordinance defining it as an extra 5 feet bonus height is granted during our design review by the planning commission at a regularly scheduled meeting with their recommendation to the town council and council approval. Design review should consider the overall topography of the land, the average height of surrounding buildings, potential impacts, and other mitigations proposed. There's been vigorous debate during the past year in planning and zoning and town council about requests to increase building heights to 30 feet, and they were all rejected. So it is clear that building heights higher than 25 feet is of high concern to not only citizens, but also planning and zoning and town council. This determination alone should have required this designation as a level 2 project, since there's no definition of bonus heights in Bulu and no authority for the zoning administrator to create one in Bulu 4.04. Furthermore, there was no request in the application for a 30-foot height, so its inclusion in the CUP is puzzling. One major important case that we learned from a prior member of planning and zoning, that when Stu Ferber was planning his hotel, planning and zoning was involved. They learned that in order to approve the plan for 3 stories, which is what this project is intending to do, the fire marshal was needed a hook and ladder fire truck as well as a building to house it in, and likely every citizen's insurance and taxes would have to be raised to cover it. Additional personnel would also be required to staff the fire station, which would be a recurring expense every year. We do not know the cost of this, but the way the CUP is drafted, I believe that would be the responsibility of the town to require it regardless of the cost. This illustrates the necessity of a review by an experienced group in order to discover major obstacles in a plan. I believe that one person, the planning and zoning administrator, can find all the pitfalls is unrealistic. And evaluating a project of this size with only a level 1 review is a perfect example of why level 2 review should be required for large projects. Benefits and enhancements to the town were not identified. Rule 16.04D, staff application completeness review.
Can I just interrupt just a second? All of those requirements that she just went through are required to be submitted with the application. You saw the application a moment ago. Can you go back a couple slides? Please, Chris. Two slide. Yeah, that one. Do you see any of those conditions addressed in this application? It says on there, it says the see attached packet. When the Zion Sunset handed the application in the special town council meeting, that was all there was. There was no attachment. So I just want to point that out. These are all shall requirements.
So I had a question about that. You said that the packet was handed in the town council meeting to who? I was at that meeting, so I'm trying to figure out.
It was the
To
January
Crystal?
5th meeting, yes. He handed it to Crystal and she received it that night.
And then the next day, and that night, we had to go and we did a grammar request to find out what was available and there was nothing in the file. Nothing.
Okay,
Okay, so Rule 16.04 states that staff application completeness review. On the filing of the conditional use application with the town clerk and payment received for the conditional use permit application filing fee, the application will be reviewed by the town staff for completeness. Crystal, I don't know, somebody. After the town staff has determined the application to comply with the filing requirements of subsection A above, it shall forward the entire application, including all materials submitted to the zoning administrator for review. So that would be Crystal.
so I have a question for you. I'm looking at 1604 where we're talking in the end. It says one of the things that need to be submitted in the application is such other pertinent information, including but not limited to proof of financial responsibility, fiscal impact analysis, professional traffic, geotechnical utility capacity and other studies, construction, excavation plans, and detailed site analysis as may be required by the zoning administrator in his sole discretion for evaluation of applications. So if that has to be part of the completeness, wouldn't you think that the zoning administrator would be part of the review for completeness? It only makes
Yeah.
sense to me, but I'm
That's
just reading the
true,
ordinance.
and that was only one section. The other
Yeah, but.
6.
But if there has to be a determination of completeness and there is a clause that allows for a zoning administrator to require additional studies and things to be submitted, I would have to assume that the zoning administrator has to be involved in the completeness review.
Yes, I would say so. That one item is the only place where they said all those other 6 items were required by the conditional by the 16.04.
So if the zoning administrator was part of the town staff, he would have still failed in his duties because he did not require that these, I think there's 7 items actually. One of them I think they had. But the zoning administrator failed in his duties to require that the application was complete.
Because they didn't provide a written description or narrative, an estimate number of employees.
Right.
Or the number of buildings or equipment. Now, things like that, I questioned about, I look at a site plan, which you're questioning whether or not it was submitted or not, but yet it was attached to the conditional use permit, and it's got buildings and the, equipment or improvements on it. I couldn't see any notation about employees, but I couldn't see that there was any place where, like an employee office building or something on that site.
The site plan first appeared in the CUP. It was not in the application. And it did not appear until the CUP was issued.
In your
Where it came from-
knowledge of that is what? Because all You're saying it was not included. Now, I can appreciate your request, but I want to make sure that the council members are hearing this because is that your opinion or how do you have knowledge of that? Because all I know is I'm seeing if a permit is issued the same day and it's got these things attached, I would have to assume it was submitted with it.
We submitted a grammar request. You want to flip a couple pages down, I don't know if they'll be able to read that. Couple more pages forward, Crystal.
The grammar request?
Yeah, let me read my copy, it's kind of hard to read for me. I have to read what we actually requested.
Actually, we submitted the grammar request and not only was the application not in there because it had just been submitted, but there was no conditional use permit.
When was this submitted? This is submitted on the 9th?
The 6th,
The 6th of January.
Okay.
and the records we requested, thank you, Crystal. Where we asked for files. I'm sorry, all virgin, we asked for a number of things. We asked for estimates on impact fees and water connections. That was not compliant. They didn't have anything. You'll see the note at the bottom. All virgin CUPs approved as level 2, nothing. Files, drawings, elevations, work notes, and written communications and digital files, which are all mentioned in the application requirement of 1604. And you'll see Crystal's note at the very bottom that she sent me copies of the 2021 and 2020 CUP via email. And I came into the office, there was nothing in the files. She had no plans for parcel 7. There was nothing in the file except the executed CUP. So this is a lot of work for a zoning administrator to look at and approve the CUP and have it drafted the same day. I think that's incredulous.
What we're trying to imply that the process, according to Voodoo, was not followed at all. The application that was submitted 2 weeks after the conditional use permit was signed. There was no application in the file because it had just been given to the town clerk. And that there was no other information of any type that I don't know this, but I suspect that the developer wrote the CUP. And that maybe Jean read it or not, I don't know. And it was signed on the 22nd of December. So, but there was nothing in the file to substantiate any of the information that was placed in the CUP. And also, I just go on to say that upon the filing of the CUP application with the town clerk and payment for the filing fees, and it's supposed to be reviewed for completeness. Nobody in the town had a chance to do that because there was no application filed until after the CUP. And then after the zoning administrator is supposed to forward the application, including all materials submitted. And he reviews it. This step wasn't completed because there was no application until 2 weeks after the CUP was signed. And because the ordinance was not followed, the CUP should be illegal. Also, the permitted uses are not allowable in that HRC zone.
That's your laundromat argument?
I think we have more.
Okay. No, I meant the argument that laundromats are not a permitted or conditional use in the highway resorts.
These are condominiums. And it's not a hotel motel. Hotel motels have,
What are the differences between a hotel motel and a condominium in a mansion style condominium building?
This is a mansion style condominium building.
I know, but what is the difference between a hotel?
So I
and a
would say a hotel, and I think recently the planning and zoning looked at having a hotel defined as a building where there's a receptionist. And that you come in to an entrance with a receptionist. And then most motels don't have laundry facility in the rooms, a full kitchen in the rooms. They're usually not 13 to 1,500 square feet. And
So our definition is a hotel is a building commonly with multiple floors, staircases, elevators, and internal corridors that furnish lodging, etc. to travelers or their guests for compensation.
yeah, that's quite.
Pretty broad.
Yeah,
That's why I asked the question.
I don't
Our condominiums in a mansion style building, is that? It doesn't say receptionist or anything. I know that there might be some effort to amend that, and I would probably support something like that as the town's attorney, but I'm just simply asking. You say that condominiums are not allowed in the highway resort zone, and I just wanted, and my question was, how are they different?
If you turn to exhibit B of the 2022 CUP,
Okay.
you'll see that there's, I'm sorry, it's exhibit C. And you'll see that the condominium floor plan drawing. See on exhibit C, the first page.
I'm almost there.
Okay. I know it's a lot of documents.
No, you're good. You're good. Oh, here's A. Is that the one with floor plan?
Yeah,
That one is about stage.
yes, exhibit C. Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And if you look at the bottom drawing, which these are about all the layouts we have, you see an internal corridor.
Well,
I think we're probably getting down deep into the.
it says
weeds.
commonly with internal corridors. It doesn't.
Let me bring
I
it
would
down.
also say that the CUP says conditional use permit, parcel 7, hotel, motel, short-term rental, condominiums with a single owner or multiple owners with a single manager. That's what the title of the conditional use permit is.
So let me bring up a point. All of these elements are shalls. They are must requirements. So defining that the CUP is arbitrary or capricious, any one of them needs to be declared as illegal. So.
And the
I would
shalls-
get to.
Oh, I get it. My question is, that's your argument, and you're saying that the shalls are and I keep jumping around between chapters, but in chapter 16. You're saying under 16.4, I believe it is.
Almost all of them are shalls.
Yeah, 16.4A. Says the applicant shall include. And it has that list of 7 items.
Right.
Okay, and you're saying that. My question is, and we're obviously gonna ask the zoning administrator and the permittee what was submitted. Because I think you're going off of a surmise or a response from a clerk as to what was submitted, so we have to hear it from all parties, give everybody their due process. But I'm saying, you're saying that a site plan, if it identified things like buildings and utilities and things like that, that wouldn't satisfy these requirements, or it would?
I would submit that if they were included with the application,
Yeah.
they may very well
Okay.
satisfy the conditions. But the fact is, they were not submitted with the application, and the application was submitted 2 weeks after the CUP was granted.
Okay, so,
And submitted, I just want to make sure that I understand, submitted means to the clerk.
Yes,
Not submitted to another member of town staff.
correct.
Okay.
Which is what Hulu said. It's to be submitted to the town clerk.
And do you think that that's fatal?
Yeah,
Okay,
I really do.
appreciate it.
That's one of the many, there's 23 others.
I mean, everyone else in town has to follow the rules and procedures. That's what we expect.
Okay. Do you know if any other conditional use permits were submitted to the zoning administrator instead of the clerk? That's a question I'm gonna ask the zoning administrator, but I'm just asking you if you guys have knowledge of that.
No.
Just want to hear it.
No,
I want to understand the facts.
it probably happened in the Steve Woodbury case.
Is that relevant?
Well, I'm gonna ask the
We're
question.
we're not opening all the other CUPs that have been filed. We're only talking about this one. So, but what the practice has been in the past.
Well, that goes to my question, is it failed?
Okay.
I mean, there are requirements, I think, in the way that I read and the way I see judges interpret statutes and ordinances, there are requirements, and some things, if they are substantive, clearly fatal. Procedural, maybe not fatal. That's why I'm asking you is the fact that if it was submitted to this town zoning administrator versus submitted to the town clerk, even if the ordinance says shall, is that procedural and is it fatal? That's all I'm asking that question.
I would say that you should look on page 6 of our statement and look at the Carter versus Delaney case.
Okay.
Where it says under Utah law, approvals which do not comply with statutory notice and procedural requirements are void. Also, it says allowing the applicant to submit a last minute application prevents the public from being adequately notified of the nature of the approval being considered. This violates the principle of public notice, and public bodies should not consider applications until complete information is made available to the public. And that was from the Utah Office of the Proper Right Ombudsman.
But you're not challenging like the validity of the conditional use permit ordinance, the level 1, level 2 CUP, the process.
Yes, we are. I don't think we've got there quite yet, but we're almost there.
So you're making but I'm saying you're making a substantive challenge.
That the procedure was not followed, and that by
The
itself,
procedure wasn't followed, but not the underlying ordinance itself is
I don't see any.
invalid or unconstitutional or something like that.
I don't think so, other than that one item I mentioned about the previously identified person. I haven't seen anything that is an ordinance problem, and that's kind of a ridiculous statement.
Okay. Go ahead and proceed.
Okay. All right. The CUP lists condominiums as a permitted use, but Lulu 44.08 and 44.10 only allow lodging uses of single-family dwelling, guest houses, casitas, and bed and breakfast. Conditional use are hotel, motel, commercial habitation, Lulu 40.8, limited commercial habitation, Lulu 16.25, 26, and campground. There's no permitted use for either condominiums or short-term rentals listed in Lulu. Common community laundry is listed as a permitted use, but that is also not allowed in an HRZ zone. Issuance of a conditional use permit by the zoning administrator for use not listed in Lulu in the specific zone is clearly outside the authority of the zoning administrator and thus illegal. Now, slide 8. A review of the town record by the grammar request on January 6 indicates there is virtually nothing in the town record other than the late filed and incomplete application 2020 and 2021 CUPs for the parcel and the 2020 CUP itself. There is no substantial evidence in the file that any of the above concerns were looked at, considered, and certainly not documented. Therefore, under Utah Code 10.9A, whatever, a land use decision is arbitrary and capricious if the land use decision is not supported by substantial evidence in the record. Now, Lauren's going to continue.
Wrap it up. So as evidence in the record from the 2019 appeal by Mrs. Timmerman versus Town of Virgin and other precedents, It is clear that we meet the requirements of being potentially adversely affected and aggrieved parties. We are also entitled to alternative standing by raising issues of significant public importance that is requiring the town to obey applicable laws and ordinances. A land use decision is arbitrary and capricious if the land use decision is not supported by substantial evidence in the record. There is virtually no evidence in the town records, and certainly nothing substantial as evidenced by grammar requests. Because the zoning administrator took the level 1 review process, much of the documentation and substantial evidence found in Timmerman, including the complete application, plans, planning and zoning commission meetings and recommendations, comments from the public, and adjustments made in the application process were all not in the file. This appeals board must find that the decision was both arbitrary and capricious. Slide 9. Based solely on the fact that Rule 1604 and a total of 24 other Google violations were not followed either by Zion Sunset or the town, the appeals board must also find that the CUP was illegal. Utah Code 1098-8013D says a determination of illegality requires a determination that the decision violates a law, statute, or ordinance in effect at the time the decision was made. Green versus Brown, which is previously cited, established that it must be found to be only arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. We have proven that all three are present in this case. Finally, the 2022 conditional use permit is contradictory and inaccurate and not in the best interest of the town for the following 6 reasons. 1, the description of the parcel in the body of the CUP do not agree with the legal description, and both contain inaccuracies which be consolidated and clearly defined. The issued CUP indicates that it's for parcel 7, but the CUP also introduces parcel 9 and 10, granting additional rights to the applicant for those parcels. Paragraph C of the recitals, next slide please, contains inaccurate information. For example, this is the permit that was identified as document number ending in 589, is not actually a permit or CUP, but only a legal description. The 21 CUP was dated 11/29/21. Sorry.
I just want to see it at the very top. Yeah, but that's, okay.
That's the same entry number.
Yeah. But that's not a copy of the document. So if you search the public records and you search under that, it's going to give you this information. It's going to give you basic information like when it was recorded, numbers like that, and the legal of the parcel that it affects. But then there's a place where you can click on the actual document itself.
Okay, I'm gonna bring up something that we discovered when we were meeting with Crystal when we did the grammar request. Okay. The official 2021 CUP was never filed in the town records. Nor was it filed with the county, as per the town clerk. She found this through searching some old emails. She found the 21 CUP. Can you affirm that statement?
The 21 CUP?
Yeah.
Yeah. We never had copies of the actual 2021 CUP, and that's why the mayor asked.
Do you have a copy of it in an
I
email?
have an email now from Jared, that office, like, Jared was doing somebody else, but they sent all of them forward.
And this may become.
We have all the
important.
applications. The actual CUP. Funny how companies been missing in our office.
It also points out the importance of keeping contemporaneous records when you're going through all these elements that are required that the zoning administrator must have followed. There's no notes. I don't know how anybody would keep track of all this in their head. Okay, so let me continue. And since the 2021 CUP was dated 11/29/21, and since an application to extend was not submitted within 1 year as required under Rule 16C, that application should have been considered abandoned and should have been referred to the town council in a public meeting before restating the terms of the CUP in its entirety. The town specifically waives the standard 1-year completion rule, so now the developer has as long as they want to extend the project. Even worse, the project could be abandoned after it started, and since there are no bond requirements, there will be no funds to clean up the project by the town. You should keep in mind that this project was started, and I'm not sure about this exactly, almost 7 years ago. Paragraph 5 that prevents uses and conditions appears that one of the inducements of the developer is to provide long-term rentals for their employees. But the paragraph is written so that long-term rentals can be up to 20%, meaning that there could be none of the units allowed for employee long-term rentals. This language should be rewritten. Additionally, the remainder of the units, which could be 100%, are proposed to be used as short-term rentals, which is not a permitted use even with a CUP in the HRZ zone. Number 5, in the language contained in recital C, the stated intent is to amend and restate in its entirety the 21 CUP, but the 22 permit does not have any detailed drawings such as included in the 21 CUP to show what is actually approved. The CUP allows 3-story, 30-foot tall buildings. Do you know where they're going to be placed? How it will affect site views or even what the exterior elevations will look like? These should all be defined in the CUP exhibits. Most of those were defined in the 21 CUP, but are absent in this one. So my belief is that they're not binding because that permitted expired. The statement that begins on page 4 of the CUP that Virgin Town grants all rights to develop the development without modification or interference by Virgin Town is clearly not in the best interest of the town and is ambiguous, especially considering that none of the detailed drawings were submitted with this application. It appears that this CUP is not overturned. Zion Sunset will be able to make all decisions about their development on the property and is very likely to jeopardize the town with legal action if they try to interfere. In summary, both the United States and Utah Code have longstanding support of the requirement that governments take their actions and conduct their deliberations openly. This is the largest development done in Virgin history, and it was done entirely behind closed doors, hidden from the public, and without the ability for planning and zoning or town attorney to review the final draft. In summary, we ask that the appeals board will, 1, overturn the CUP issued on December 22nd, 2022. It meets not just one, but all 3 standards of being arbitrary, capricious, and illegal. 2, require that the new application for the largest project in Virgin history be evaluated as a level 2 CUP, which requires planning and zoning approval and public hearings. And 3, if you find that you must take the matter under advisement, I would ask that the town attorney admonish both Gene Garrotti and the appeals board members from conferring with each other about this matter outside of public hearing. If the need to call Gene Garrotti as a witness, further testimony arises, it should be done only in public and in the presence of all parties. And then 4, require that the town attorney review a draft of any proposed CUP before signatures. That completes my statement. Thank you for indulging us both in letting us finish.
Thank you. Okay.
I have a question before you move on to.
Yeah.
Warren or April, I saw that in the application. It sounded like you were still making the same argument, that you had argued that the decision, if I understood your argument in your appeal application, you were challenging the zoning administrator decision to make this level 1 versus level 2. Am I correct? Did I read that correct?
Yeah.
And are you still, you didn't really talk much about it in your presentation, but is that still one of your challenges?
Yes, we made a couple of references to that, but we have that is definitely one of the challenges. But it is the largest project Virgin's ever seen, and 200.
Well, and that's the reason why I asked you, why I asked if you guys were challenging the underlying ordinance itself, the way it as written, like a facial challenge to it, because I don't know whether we have the ability to hear that because we adopted that ordinance. And two, if you are, I'm looking at it, and it says that it has sole discretion to make the determination. So I don't know how that would be, his determination, how that can be illegal or arbitrary and capricious if he's given sole discretion under our ordinance.
Because the following sentence, and let me find it here.
Okay.
Do you have that up right now? It would be heard out there. It'd be 4404, probably like. Hold on a second, let me find it. See if you can find it too.
You're talking about level 1, level 2?
1604E1. I can't throw it off for you. Said my blood sugar's high.
That's pretty good. I'm looking at 1604E1. The determination of the conditional use level is vested solely in the zoning administrator, who shall look at all factors such as, so it gives a list of recommended factors to look at, and there are all those different things. So my question is, are we challenging? Are we saying that he didn't look at factors and that he should have? And do you feel like under the ordinance that we have the ability to question that on appeal when it says that the determination of the level of conditional use is vested solely in the zoning administrator?
Yes, I believe that the ordinance should be revisited and clarified. However, I also believe that the ordinance specifies that he shall look at these 6 factors. And it's impossible for him to make issue and sign a CUP 2 weeks before he got the application. So where did he get the information that was supposed to be contained in the application? No, it's done backward deal.
Warren, are you?
Yeah.
So make sure I understand this also. Are you challenging that he applied the factors and he just made the wrong decision between level 1 and level 2? Don't you look at the factors that they're incorrect?
I believe that's a decision that planning and zoning and the planning and zoning commission should have had the opportunity to look at. For example, the fire department's requirement that, they would have to put a hook and ladder in a new building. Was that
Let me
considered?
rephrase it. Do you think the zoning administrator was incorrect when he recommended a level 1 versus a level
Yes,
2?
I do.
Yeah.
And why?
Because what?
And why?
Because of those 6 items that we went through in great detail.
As you listed in your,
In your brief,
Yes,
got it.
yeah,
factors
It was-
that shall be considered.
yeah. But good,
And you're saying that because there's no written reference of what was considered, that he didn't consider it.
yeah, and that's what the Utah law says, that it's capricious and arbitrary depending on what's in the record of the town. There's nothing in the town record except this scanned application.
But the record, just like you're producing information and creating the record today. We're gonna call the zoning administrator, we wanna have him build the record too. So I think that's what we probably ought to do next before we give it. Mr. Deacons, do you have an objection with that? Our agenda says that it could be either from the committee or town as needed. I think we'd like to clear up a few questions about and ask some questions of Mr. Grotti.
I think a break would be in order first and then. we can
Yeah.
get-
Just a break really quick.
As the chair of this meeting, I call it 10-minute break.
You can see why I wanted to read it and not. There. I'm not here to. Just one thing that's funny that I haven't been.
Yeah. He was the partner. Thanks. I'm here. Well, now, inside, you know, I feel, I'll wait.
Yeah, it's a whole part.
Popping out your bag.
We went on a fight on the court. Yeah. That's one minus one. Unless they're breaking.
Yeah.
You see here.
Misty, let's see. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and reconvene. Before our break, I talked about, what I'd like to do, on the agenda, the next is response or rebuttal, from the, town staff or the committee. I think before we hear from the committee, because I think they probably have a, kind of an outline presentation that they probably want to make. I'd like to ask a few questions of Mr. Grotti, the zoning administrator, just so that the council can hear. And maybe we can fill in some information that we need to hear, with regard to the. So ask Mr. Grotti to come back up here just so that he can face the council and, on the recording. Really, if any of you have any other questions, I just have a couple of questions that I want to know. Does Jane need a microphone?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
does he not have one? Yeah, that's. Gene, the application that. For this conditional use permit that has been appealed, do you remember when you received it?
Yes.
Was it December 22nd or sometime before that?
So the discussions took place, initial discussion took place on the 5th of December with the permittee. I received a draft of that on December 15th and worked through it. And then I received it the day before on the 22nd for final set up an appointment. Well, that's when I received.
You said the day before
On the
22nd?
21st. The final.
Did the application of the documents that were given to you, they were given to you then? You know, whether they were given to the clerk?
No, that was arranged for the 22nd at 2 o'clock.
Okay. And did the documents given to you by the applicant, did it include any sort of site plans or documents like that?
Yeah, so I can see kind of where people are coming from on that, but that stuff is on file or was on file at the town and is not required to be re-given each time a new permit's done because it's already with the record at the town.
Are you saying contact information or site plan?
I'm saying everything. Now, the site plan was attached, yes. It was a small site plan attached to that.
May I ask a question or?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, we don't do cross-examination with this.
Okay.
Thanks for asking, though. It's worth asking. Hopefully I can ask the questions that you want to ask. But,
Just to touch a clarification where you're looking at that. So the information that's at the town, the clerk does the final review, and anything that's missing in that application that I provide her, that's already at the town, can be compiled at that point for public scrutiny.
Is. I don't know which. Is that one that was part of the application?
Gonna see it.
It's not the colorful one that has more detail than the entire project, but it just has, I think. It's part of. Tell. I don't know, it's cool name. Oh, I don't think you have a copy of this in the appellate slides.
The one this appears to be it, but I can't read that small screen. But yes, that appears to be
So
it.
this is part of the appeal packet. And this was an attachment to the conditional use permit. I'm guessing, let's see, we would have been under exhibit B, site plan drawings.
This I have the original.
This is the original.
May not the original copy.
Copy is the original. Let me just cut to the chase so we get to the, when you look under exhibit B, there's a colored site plan. And the one that I just handed up to you, were those included in the application?
Yes.
Okay, can you walk me through the process that you normally follow? I'm not saying in this instance, but when conditional use applications are submitted to you, what do you do?
Well, follow 16.04 the best that I can, obviously. We can look at E since that seems to be the one more. 1604 E, 16. 16, Chris, could you throw 1604 E? Oh, the determination. Yeah, is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm saying,
More vague or more rounded, I guess?
are you involved at all in the review process to determine completeness?
I consider myself to be a compiler of documents. So I look at what's required, pull that stuff together, then it gets presented to the clerk, who then receives payment and posts it.
Okay.
What do you want to be like?
1604. And when you're making sure that people are giving you everything to compile, you make them provide you with documents from 1604A.
Yes, if we don't have those on file already.
Okay. Can those things be more than just the written narrative if they're noted on the site plan or anything like that? I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I don't think anyone disagrees that there was some sort of written narrative on things like the number of buildings, for instance, but there's a site plan that has buildings on it. Help me
Beyond
understand
that, no.
Let me think, was there any other questions we had? In this instance, then, so you had been compiling documents since December 5th. And you were meeting with the clerk.
I'll clarify that. So when I say I'm compiling documents, I'm not compiling documents. I meet with the permittee, they show me what they have so far, I send them back to get things that they're missing, and it's a back and forth until they have all of the stuff necessary.
And you were planning on the 22nd to meet with the clerk, give her the documents, have them give her the fee and.
Right, I set up an appointment for 2 o'clock on December 2nd to meet with the clerk and get it notarized.
Just quickly give us a summary of what happened on Tuesday. I heard something from Leroy, and I just wanted to.
So on the 22nd, I had called earlier in the day and arranged with the clerk to come in with the applicant to review the completeness of the application as well as get the notarization done. We try to always have the clerk do the notarization, because that's also proof that it's been received by the town.
Notarization of the.
Of the CUP itself. We arrived, I arrived here, when I arrived, the mayor was.
So the CUP was prepared, it was prepared on that day, okay, for that day,
For that
in preparation for that day.
Correct. I arrived at the town at a little before 2. The mayor and the applicant were out front. The mayor informed us that the clerk had been sent home due to a power outage. We arranged to meet again on the following Tuesday to get the rest of the application there. After we left, I had some conflicts, so we went and had it notarized at a separate location. And he was then instructed to bring that back on the following Tuesday to turn the entire application in. And then from there, I haven't had anything to do with it.
Okay, let me ask you about prior, there was some question about the 2021 conditional use permits. I'm trying to think what the issue was, whether they're present in the city's files. Do you know what? Did you give them?
So, yeah, I can't speak to what's in that file now. I know that the one that's at the county, the recorded version has the clerk's signature and notarization on it for that date.
It has crystals?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, well, okay, so that's
Beyond that, I don't know
what's in there. Yeah, do you maintain the files on land use applications?
I do not.
That would be Crystal.
That's correct.
Council, have any other questions?
I do, I'm trying to listen to it and trying to put the process in my mind in this particular case. If I understand correctly, you worked with the applicant, and had, as a compiler, compile all the documents that need to be submitted.
Correct.
You in the process also at the same time processed the CUP and prepared it, so it was prepared, ready to be filed along with the application.
What do you mean?
The actual permit with the conditions, the CUP permit.
I worked with the applicant.
Okay, and that was prepared prior to him submitting it to the clerk.
That's correct.
So that would have all been submitted at the same time.
Correct.
So the application was never submitted to the clerk prior to you preparing the permit.
That is correct.
And then I do want to, it's not a question that he asked you, but when you made the decision, this was level 1 versus level 2. What was your decision? What and why did you make that decision?
Decision to go with level 1 was made many years prior with the original CUP. After 13 years of public input on this project, there was nothing more to discuss, and the lawsuits in play. The public knew everything that was going on with it. I looked at the scope, everything else that was going to be involved with it, with neighbors, and made the determination at that point that it was in the best interest of both the town and the applicant to do this as a level 1 CUP.
So if I'm understanding you're correct, based on the fact that you've already approved this as a level 1 CUP, you're going to continue with a level 1 CUP, irrespective of what was submitted?
Unless there's some outstanding need that pops up that's different.
I'm not as familiar with the 2021 CUP. Was there a significant difference in the scope?
No.
Like number of units or rooms or rooms?
What about this?
Slight adjustments.
Was it a hotel? Or was it a more of a mansion style condominium?
You know,
buildings?
I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look.
And it's my understanding, was there another CUP prior to that?
Yes, 2020 was the original.
And then,
I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah.
'Cause I
And
was-
then when you did the 2021, I know that one was never advertised or put on public knowledge website, correct?
I can't say. I don't do.
So there was, I didn't mean to be misleading. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
I know it was submitted, signed, recorded, and that when they record, the copy comes back.
They recorded it.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, we're gonna obviously.
They have some later.
Call them back up. But Mr. Eakins, the floor is yours.
For Mr. Westall.
I'm gonna call your mic.
Don't give me your candy. This goes.
Council, my client, Mr. Westhoff's going to go first. As he began, this will essentially be our submittal at this point of records and the, below much of this is either record on or has been discussed today, the chronology, there's the 2020 permits, as well as the records related to the one that's in dispute today. And some explanations listing density adjustment for height and density issues. That'll be our submittal. I'll let Mr. Westhoff go first and then address actual issues and questions that we have.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know this is a lot of time for everything, so appreciate your time. I'll just go through the chronology here real quick. On the week of December 5th, we basically got a hold of the zoning administrator, asked them what we needed to do if we were interested in updating and our conditional use permit.
You heard, sorry, you heard the testimony, Mr. Grani, was that around the 1st of December?
Yes. And there was a discussion there. I may go into I'm gonna try to be brief because this has been long, but yet I want to hit some flavor there. So we discussed whether or not we should update the permit or file a whole new permit. And Mr. Garati is very dutiful in his job, so he just basically said, we filed a permit in 2019 that had the 200 units on it, and then in 2021 that was changed to 136 units. And we were great. We were moving along with that plan. We liked the plan. And a buyer came along and said, we'd like to purchase some property and we liked your layout from your 2019 permit. So we basically said there's some good things, more specificity written out in the 2021 permit from the 2019, but the layout in 2019 is more preferred. So we basically merged the two permits. Gene felt that there was enough stuff in there that he directed us to work up a new permit, not just amending the old permit. So there was a series of back and forth and questions and what the town requires and what should be seen as conditions, what should be spelled out. And so we went to the work of drafting that new conditional use permit. And that permit itself actually is our narrative, along with the exhibits. Because we started working through that.
You're saying the permit that's being, this new one?
Yes, and that's what is meant by see the attached packet. And so we went back and forth on that. We took a lot of feedback from the zoning administrator. We came back with another what we believe to be a final draft on December 15th. We had a check there. We included that in the packet, not realizing the process was that we should wait till we meet with the clerk recorder to give the check. I don't even think he knew we just basically handed him a packet and said, let us know if we missed something. And then we came back on December 22nd after the appointment was made to hopefully finalize the permit. The mayor basically met me in the parking lot, let me know that the power outage was going on and she had sent the clerk recorder home. I handed her the packet, she went through it. There was some discussion back and forth. She ended up handing the packet back and basically said, just come back in on Tuesday. The office is closed for the holidays to the public, but we'll make sure it's open because it's closed now due to the power being out. Somewhere in there, I got a note from a text from Gene saying, I've been directed that conditional use permits are to be approved by the mayor and the attorney. And so I was confused as to what to do, and didn't know what to do. And so I basically started reaching out and saying, hey, I'm concerned that this has been signed off on, as Gene described when the mayor handed me the packet back. She left, we were going to Texas for Christmas, or at least I think that was the plan at the time. And we ended up having the permit notarized by another notary. And so then the following week, I was like very concerned that this hadn't been put up on the public notice website. And we want to make sure the public's aware of what we're doing and we're following the rules. So reached out to town staff, and then it ended up getting noticed that week. What my understanding is the office was closed between the holidays, so we got back in and finally gave the application and the check that had been given to the mayor that was handed back on the 5th. So that's the chronology here that I'm aware of. And I think, you know, it's been quite a process to go through with Gene to make sure that we have a good application and we have renderings, and we have a floor plan, and we did some civil design, and we make sure that we have all the roads. And I mean, I could go into all the stuff that was stated before, but I mean, we have, I think people understood the level of effort that's been gone to both by myself and the town administrator to make sure we have a good packet. We probably wouldn't be having this hearing. I mean, there's been a ton of work to comply with the ordinance and make sure that we've spelled out. I do want to bring something up as far as the comment about that we've moved dirt all over the project. The reason we moved dirt all over the project is your ordinance. We don't want to develop that way. That's insane. But your ordinance requires that once we get a conditional use permit, that we commence work within a year. And so that's like a burden you would normally see under a building permit, not as conditional use permit. In my experience, the type of conditional use permit we're looking for here and have here, it runs with the land. So we, by necessity, to show that we were perfecting the conditional use permit, whether it was the 2019 or the 2021 or 2022, we went and did work on the project. And so we wanted to comply with your ordinance. We've stubbed utilities to every parcel. We've done dirt on every parcel. We would prefer just to stub the utilities and not do the dirt work, but we felt we had to show that we were doing work on the project so we could perfect the permit and protect our investment. And so that's what we've done. As far as dust goes, we have had 1 to 2 water trucks out there any day that the wind is blowing. We do know we had some complaints and had a city meeting once on those. And it was interesting because the day they were talking about when I was in Hurricane, I couldn't even open my eyes driving down Main Street, or when I got out to go get a taco. Like we've got a lot of wind that comes across the river too. And we've taken a lot of effort to make sure that we're suppressing dust and doing what we can there. And wish we could control Mother Nature, but we can't. And depending on your perspective, we could do a better job, but we've made a good faith effort and have constantly had water trucks going on windy days out there. As far as jumping through the different factual points, I don't know if Matt, if I could turn over to you to walk through their points.
Any questions up to this point in terms of what Mr. Westhoff just described?
Okay, well, might as well. Talking to follow up with the question. Does the dirt roll, have you looked to see what part of town the dirt covers? Does it cover all the town, portion of town, just the east and west?
What do you mean?
When the wind's blowing the dust in the dirt?
Oh, where does the dirt from it originate from his property?
Yeah, from his property, yes.
Primarily flow to.
Oh,
Which
direction,
direction?
whatever.
depends on the time of year.
Yeah.
We've got a north wind sometimes we got a south wind. We've had eastern wind a lot where we're getting it off the desert and comes across. We do have a couple sandy spots on the property. We put a crust on those spots. And every time, and then we do our best to keep anybody from driving on them, once we develop that crust.
So is it fair to say that, depending on the direction of the wind, it could be the east side of your project,
I would agree with that,
and it could be the west side of your project?
yes.
There's nothing to the south that I can think of. So there's no buildings or anything there. What about to the north side across SR9 up towards the cemetery?
Yeah, so that's historically always a wind blown area on the property itself. There was a sand dune in the middle and it's always blown there.
Okay, but does it come from your property?
It comes from our neighbor's property, the BLM, our property, and our neighbor to the south east as well.
And then you know where the 101's located? Where Gene Garati lives and towards the far east of town.
I know where that's located, yeah.
Does the dirt from your property hit that area, do you know?
I'd have a hard time imagining that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? He's much more entertaining than I am.
But he talks about wind.
No, let's get to the law. Let's go.
We're gonna jump in and address the standing issue at this point. I guess I have a personal knowledge of what the applicant or the appellants are relying upon in terms of showing that they have standing. I was the one that authored that decision, very familiar with the legal analysis there. As we pointed out here, there is a change in state law between that decision of 2019 and where we sit today. More specifically, House Bill 388 was in the 2020 general session and it became effective May 12th, 2020. That has been described already, will have binding effect and supersede anything that the town has or any prior decision. I also 2019 Appeal Authority decision on the conditional use permit is not binding on this. The town ordinance and the process that's been discussed, as well as the state code and state law would be applicable here, but it's clearly stating that the adverse affected party is required here to be able to proceed with the claim today. And Warren Campbell and Abraham McKeon do not meet that standard. There's been under the first requirement and adjoining property, there's been no information or allegation stated that they are adjacent to this project. I'm not aware of any information that they are an adjacent property owner. The second requirement is that they would suffer a damage different in kind than that of the general community. What I've heard today is simply two arguments. One is that they've been injured because of the dirt. I haven't heard any information that's unique to them, why their properties have been impacted different than the general community. We've heard question and testimony related to, depending on the prevailing winds, could affect the community differently. This second part is key because the appellants are pointing out a public policy argument is one of the reasons they have standing. And really what we're looking at here is the second part of this test on an adverse party is pulling back from that general public policy. An affected party can't be standing in the shoes as a general member of the public. And I think we have good reason why. Upon our information, not only personal experience from my client in the Timmerman appeal that has been discussed, that went all the way to the Supreme Court on somebody that was found to have standing because they are a general member of the public. And ultimately, the conditional use permit prevailed. And then we had in 2020, the state legislature pulling back and saying, we're specifically requiring unique harm other than a general member of the public. Our information is also that legislative, this particular case was a factor in why that legislation came
That was
about.
my question. Is there any legislative history behind that House bill? Anything could give us some directive that it was an attempt to unilaterally or statutorily overturn the case law of the public interest doctrine?
I would have to look at that. That's a great question. I haven't researched that specifically. I'd be happy to supplement it. Our information has been related to the Timmerman case specifically, and it was a factor in why that legislation came about.
Thank you.
Is that something that the council would find interesting to have a legislative history on what precipitated and led to that House Bill 388? It may be a little dry, but I'm happy to do it.
I think it would be relevant. They've made the argument that it's a secondary argument that notwithstanding that they have standing under the public interest doctrine, which is a creature of case law. And then your argument has been that this statute was put in place. And my question is was it intentional by the legislature to basically overturn that body of case law, that doctrine by statute? And I can appreciate the argument. I just don't know that that was the legislative intent. So I would appreciate a little bit. I don't expect you to do much, but if there's anything in the legislative history. And I think that's all you need to, if you want to look at the annotated version of the statute and their listing of legislative preferences, that would be the only thing we would want to know.
Okay. But as we look at that second factor, clearly the first doesn't apply to these two appellants that they have presenting property. So really for them to get past, to show that they do have standing and burdens on them, they have to show that there is unique harm to them. And as it's been thoroughly prepared. In the summary of slides here, the provisions and spots, this is on page 3 of 12 of what's been submitted in writing and discussed in today's hearing. Starting in the middle, the first harm is it says we are aggrieved parties because we and the entire town are harmed when the town creates and obeys ordinance. So they're putting themselves in the same position as the town for that entire process of what the ordinances and its applications by land use authority, staff, town council. They're not, again, distinguishing between anything unique to them. The second paragraph discusses harms about wind blowing. As we discussed today, there's been nothing unique to that. And in fact, all of the opposition that's happened over the years of litigation, but for that, it's very likely that the development and improvements would be done and there wouldn't be raw ground. So they haven't been, generally speaking, the friendly version haven't been helping cause and mitigating that dust control they're claiming is a harm today. Furthermore, the building permit process has specific requirements in terms of what is required for dust control mitigation, and we've heard testimony that's been addressed and worked on. There have been problems, but that's been addressed in that process. The conditional use permit in and of itself doesn't have a specific dust control other than maintenance concerns there.
You think that is fatal because does that address? Was there a failure to address a known detrimental effect of the development?
Can you restate that, please?
You indicated that the conditional use permit doesn't contain any provision addressing dust mitigation. If that has been a known detrimental effect of grading and scarifying the ground, do you think that it should have been? That's an argument, yeah, be made by the appellants.
Yeah. we're here to comply with the ordinances. There's no dust control ordinance. If there was something in place, specifically made requirements, and that would be imposed. That would not necessarily be something incorporated in conditional use permit. It would be.
Do you think conditions on a conditional use permit can only be imposed if they have a basis in the town's ordinances?
No, there could be other considerations.
I just want to make sure, I kind of got that impression, that was your response, was that, well, there's no dust mitigation requirements in the city's ordinance, so yes, it's not there.
On that note, Mr. Snow, we have, anytime that we've been called about a dust issue, we have either already been working on it or added a second water truck to it. So it's been well known by.
You just call Alan Lee to bring the water truck down, right?
Yeah. So we've had Feller's water truck.
Everything.
We've had Feller's water truck on site, we've had 2 water trucks on site, we've had times where we've had 3. And we deal with the heat of the sun, and we're doing our darndest, and as we're throwing it out there, some of it's evaporated and some of it gets there. And it's been well known to staff that we are doing everything we can to tamp down any dust and limit what we're doing there. We wish we weren't required to tear into every parcel to perfect our conditional use permits. But even with that, we've had plenty of dust mitigation. We installed at an extreme cost to us. I think it was $22,000 or $24,000 our own water load, so that we could get water from right on the project through our irrigation system for dust mitigation. Like, we take it serious. And so I don't think that was in the mind of the zoning administrator as like a concern that needed to be addressed, where we've been all over addressing. But as far as like some of these other concerns, like the height requirement, I think it's, we probably could have done a better job putting a recital or 2 explaining why we have a bonus height written into the permit. And I would point out a few things. We installed a 10-inch sewer line to Water Street. That's beyond what our project needs. And we did that as one of the conditions, and Gene was very thoughtful in having this discussion of saying, look, we have a lot of commercial development to the east, and maybe your 8-inch line that would get close to that, it wasn't extending to Water Street anyway, wouldn't be enough if the city ever went to sewer. And so would you upsize that? And what can we do here on this back and forth? So we not only upsized it from 8-inch to 10-inch, but we extended it all the way to the public right away in Water Street. There's an easement that we are going to be granting to Ash Creek Special Service District for the treatment plant that we're putting in there, the bioreactor there, as well as enough room for a lift station, so that if the Arenco systems or other systems people are using in town ever have issues, that if they want to switch to a lift station, we are the lowest spot, the most logical spot for a lift station for the town. And if the irrigation line is followed from the east towards our project, most of what's on the east side of town will gravity flow to our project. Additionally, it was discussed that we could adjust the way our infrastructure worked to the west to put in an 8-inch sewer line stubbing out towards the west. And so that work on the 10-inch line is done. The work for the 8-inch line is mostly done to the west. And those were things that we asked for to get that bonus, who asked of us to get that bonus density.
That was what my question was gonna be. Are you stating those things because those were the basis for the bonus density and the bonus height on the building?
Yeah, definitely for the bonus height. On the bonus density, we deed restricted our parcel 10, which does include developable land more than what was shown on that slide. That developed parcel 10 is a unique legal description that goes across the river in 2 spots and then goes all the way up to the whole highway. We cleaned out a whole pond to make a fishing pond for everyone and enlarged it. We have a bunch of slope there. We've added trails. We'll have over 1.5 miles of trails. That was also part of the bonus density and bonus height discussion. We, the deed restriction, making sure we allocate 4.5 acres. I think it's worth pointing out too, that there's an additional 9 acres of private open space that we've got there, and we've got this clustering concept on the whole project, specifically with this CUP, where we have land that we have set aside for the bison fields that is buildable. It's our upper bison field. We think the clustering concept that we've worked out is great. In fact, Mrs. Temperman actually helped us jump here in our thought process. We tried to settle with her at one point and she didn't want to take the settlement, and that's fine. But where she pushed us to, we ended up going, we like this. Let's update our conditional use permits to cluster more with the RV, and let's open up this spot in the middle of the project that can be seen in the dip through SR9, where those bison could be seen in the distance instead of RVs. And so when we do this overall project, there's massive amounts of offsite costs and expenses of connecting all these utilities. And so we've given up and already paid for this 10-inch sewer line, the 8-inch sewer line. We've paid for extra capacity in the electrical.
I don't want to stop you, but I have a question.
So we paid for the extra capacity in electrical. We added to the
That was probably me moving this.
Oh, we've added to the electrical system, and we, to get these bonus densities and or clustering this bonus height, we've set these areas aside so that we could have a nicer project, cluster units here, but open space somewhere else. And we're proud of the project, and we're okay with the zoning administrator asking these things of us because we got the benefit of the height and the clustering, and we extended additional infrastructure. But we count on the units that have been given to us to make it make sense, the financial sense. We want this quality of life on the project. We want those who visit there to come and be able to enjoy the atmosphere, and that's why we've clustered, so we can have these open spaces. As far as like the workforce housing was more of us trying to define, and the term of short-term rental in that permit was probably not the correct term, but what we're trying to define is the difference between a nightly rental and a monthly rental. And it wasn't the town exacting out of us workforce housing. We came and said, look, we might want to provide some workforce housing, and we want to clear in this permit that depending on market demands and what's going on, that we can have up to 20% of the units that we can use for a long-term rental by an affordable housing solution.
Would you agree with the appellant's argument, though, that the way that it's drafted, that you could have up to 20% based on market conditions of long-term rentals? You can always have long-term rental in a short-term rental development. So isn't that kind of just illusory?
Well, I don't know if disagree is the right word, but I characterize it different.
Okay.
I would say that in your highway resort zone, it's very clear that it's for overnight rental, which is what, and hotel use, which is nightly rental, which is what we're doing. And we would make sure that if we ever put employee housing in there 5 years from now, and some of us have moved, or heaven forbid I got hit by a truck and nobody remembered what was going on, then somebody came to us and said, hey, you've got employees living there. We want the tax revenue. That should be nightly rental. We put it clear in the permit that no, our permit says we can do up to 20% of the units for workforce housing. So this was not part of an exaction to get our.
It wasn't the basis for bonus density or for bonus height or anything like that.
It was not.
It was a protection for you or a request on your end.
It was a court request on our end as a to make sure that 5 years from now or whenever, that we would still be able to have workforce housing if the market required
Okay, Jared, I have one question. Can you help me understand the math on 200 units? Because I did the math, the appellant's math, and frankly, I think at 33%, or if I times 12 by 1.33, even 1.33 comes to 1597. I think that's 16 in my mind. But even at 16 units, is the acreage off? Because they're using 7.88 acres. I'm trying to understand, do your math for the council so that how to get to $200.
So we took the 7.8 acres,
Okay.
and then we took 4.5 acres of the open space area. And have it specifically allocated to the clustering on this 7.88 per parcel.
How did you specifically, I understand a deed restriction can preserve open space, but how do you allocate it to the 7.88 acres?
Because it's part of a commercial association that all of the parcels are jointly owning together.
So internal restrictive covenants then in your association documents? Okay,
And then we recorded the conditional use permits against the properties so that it was known of public record.
is any of the 4 acres in flood zone?
There is some acreage in flood zone and some of it is not. So I would have to do a more detailed analysis.
Yeah, I guess I'd want to know where the 4 acres were, good, because I'm not a big fan of it, but that's just personal opinion, but our ordinance does say that when you calculate development yield, you're not supposed to take in flood zones into it. So if any of the 4 acres is flood zone, I don't know if you can. Maybe that's a question I can ask Gene when he was doing the math, how he came up with it, but I personally think the way you preserve sensitive lands and areas is say that you do get to count it into it, because that incentivizes a developer to cluster and keep off of sensitive. But that's the gospel according to me.
And I know the ordinance has changed over the years. Or one time it was not part, and now it is. But what the point is, we're trying to preserve not just the parcel 10 as open space. We're actually taking a big chunk of parcel 9 and preserving it as open space as well. The reason we didn't include those acreages in parcel 9 and parcel 10 is when we have a commercial association and we were 2 hats on the project. We're the end user on the White Bison project, and we're the master developer on this hospitality development. And when we're doing that, for instance, the convenience store pad, we don't run convenience stores, that will be sold to another party. We don't run hotels, that will be sold to another party when that part of the project is sold. This parcel is being sold to another party. We have no way of knowing whether or not they know anything about livestock or agriculture. And so we've kept where we want the bison fields as open space under our private ownership, but yet through we have committed it as open space. And the point there is there's a carrying capacity of that land, and we didn't want a new owner coming in and having to sit around and explain, we're not going to have 30 bison here, our carrying capacity is 6. And we just don't want to do that. So we don't have just the open space for parcel 10, we have approximately plus or minus 9 acres with our bison pastures and our additional walking trails that loop around and through the different parcels.
You were discussing what was bonus height and what was bonus density. You said we're involved in a discussion back and forth. So what came down for the requirements of bonus height? And what was the requirements for bonus density? I'm trying to understand what it was that we did for each of those bonuses.
My memory is, and I need to look at the
And
document.
maybe that's the question for Gene, but you answer it and I'll ask Gene.
My memory is we needed to add an additional 4 acres for the density. 4.5 acres for the density. Or allocate out of that parcel 10, 4.5 acres.
Okay,
And
Anything else?
that's what made the density work.
okay,
Bonus height, the discussion around that revolved around our trails. Our sewer extensions. Not to get my notes.
now, when you say discuss, that's different than an actual agreement or requirement.
Well,
You can have discussions back and forth, but what was the actual requirement for you to get the bonus?
so as we discussed that, we put that into the actual permit that was signed.
Okay, so what elements in the permit that go ahead and
So
use the trails, sewer, extension?
trails, sewer extension, and those are part of the site plan. That's why we show just the property, and that's why we show the bigger property. So that all those key notes and everything on the larger property on those maps show where the trails are, or the trails will be combined and used by everyone versus when they're just specific to a parcel. So each parcel will have its own set of amenities, and then there's the general amenities. And the general amenities are where we get the bonuses.
I think he's referring to this one, Paul, the overall development that shows the open space and the trails.
Right.
Which was attached to the conditional use permit. Paul, I would also say for the council's benefit, I think that it's something that we could improve in our ordinances, but frankly, we don't have a criteria on what justifies a bonus density right now. I have helped other municipalities do that. Like, certain things get you a certain percentage increase in your density, like not just preservation of open space, it could be, granting of trails and everything, but frankly, we don't have that, it's.
Yeah, and the other thing that I see too is there's no formal condition or document that specifies, at least that's what I'm hearing.
Other than
What they're testing, well, that doesn't tell you what was given for bonus density, tells you what the amenities are.
But it tells you what's being preserved as open space, and yeah, what the amenities.
Yes, and that's where I get lost because nobody you can't, from somebody from the outside or anybody saying, what was it that you gave up for the bonus densities, what was given up for the bonus height, and that's something we'll need to look at in the future, because that's bad for both the applicant and for the town and for the citizens. Everybody should be on the same page as to what constitutes a bonus, what constitutes a height, and what have you contributed for.
For it. Paul, our council member.
You can call me Paul, that's all right.
I completely agree with you that we take a lot of pride in the permit we drafted, but we should have included more recitals and more detail behind that so that people understood that. And we held ourselves to the requirement based off of the math and based off of what was written in the permit. But we didn't help connect the dots as to why we did that. And we definitely are learning. We could have done that better.
Any other legal points you guys would like to make?
Yeah, back to standing, our favorite issue for the day. On page 3, one of the last argument raised really relates to the open public meetings. The argument's been made that this has been done privately without the opportunity for public comment. As you've heard today, Mr. Westhoff has been engaged for on many levels, meetings and over time to make this public process and involved. Clearly, it's not the case. And the way that the town has structured its level 1 and level 2 is really a scenario to incentivize, to give structure. So a town has, as discussed earlier today, a legislative process and administrative process. The land use authority under level 1 is the zoning administrator. the town council, in putting on its legislative hat, passed the designation of what happens with an application for a conditional use permit to streamline it. Give focused conversation, really it's designed to bring stability, predictability, rather than what could happen in the public process and opening it up. Not that that's bad, but there's a lot more moving parts to that. For example, a very similar structure with the zoning administrator, the version is adopted with Pole Canyon project near Eagle Mountain. We put in a 14+ acre Tyson Foods processing plant over $300 million. And it followed a very similar process with what we call the zoning administrator, where the rules were set up ahead of time. That land use authority was given the ability to come in and work with the developer and the end user and put together a project that worked well. So this isn't a new concept or something unique to the town of Virgin, but it really provides somebody to come in and say, let's get this done. I know there's been some frustrations with other developers and meetings I've attended earlier this year that they feel like the lines being moved. And they can't get applications in or approvals made. Well, the zoning administrator gives that setting and circumstance to jump in and deal with that. So the open meeting process wasn't just on this in terms of the structure. This open meeting discussion in terms of why do we have a zoning administrator who we want in the first place, that took place with the legislative process and prior town council members and going through that. Now, if this town council doesn't like that, and there may be reasons to adjust the town code, we're not opposed to that. There maybe are some improvements that could be had. But what we're dealing with is the kind of our application. We get to deal with the code that's in place at that time, as well as the town, and all citizens are bound by that code that's in place. This is not a forum to change the rules on level 1 or level 2.
Mr. Akins, let me ask you a question. Is a building permit land use approval?
Is a building permit a land use
Approval?
approval? I would say that's a land use authority decision.
That done in a public meeting? Is that done with public notice?
No,
Okay. That was the same question I was going to ask the appellant. There are instances where certain land use approvals don't go through, public noticing, and so I would agree that citations to the Open and Public Meetings Act and the policy behind the Open and Public Meetings Act, I don't know if that's completely relevant, because not all land use decisions are made in public meetings.
And I would add to that, in this case with Virgin, at times in its history, it hasn't been very friendly to applicants and this.
Free battery.
With that lack of stability, it's been, I think, historically hard for the town to have a business owner want to come and invest any capital to be able to create a sales tax revenue or to be able to create trails or roads or a beautiful landscape Main Street or whatever, because the applicants haven't had a steady process. And my view of when the town, and this is just me, I wasn't on the town council, but my view when the town council legislated the passing of a tier 1 versus a tier 2 was in hopes to create some stability so that people could come and have a professional environment to be able to work through a land use application and use their property. And I think it's worked. The town budget has more than tripled in the last 4 years since the tier 1, tier 2 was created. I think it's been there. You could change it, you could update it, and there's arguments probably valid for both, but it's been a good public policy. And then secondly, I would point out that the Virgin's code gives all kinds of mitigating requirements in its code that is really easy for me as an applicant and for your zoning administrator to ask me to follow. It has these setback requirements based off of the zoning you're next to. It has front yard, side yard. Like it has in your code stuff that would normally be thought through as a condition. Like there's some setbacks that are quite extreme in your code. as if everybody pre-thought what the conditions would be that we've been subject to that may or may not apply to us. But we've applied them because they're in your code, and it's been great to be able to work with your zoning administrator to understand those and how they apply and make sure we put them on our site plan. And so I would say that the tier one, given the specificity of your code and mitigating circumstances for a conditional use permit, are pretty good. They're pretty stringent, and I would say some places over the top.
Anything else?
Yes. You know, speaking of the zoning administrator, I work with a lot of towns. I get to see different staff officials. Given the size and the authority designated, King Karate does a fantastic job. He's very informed. He understands many aspects of development. So I don't want this process or questions that are raised in the examination today create any questions to his abilities or undermine his capacity to perform. I think he's represented Bergen very well and has helped not only this project, but certainly helped the town interest in what's taking place here. There was a point discussed earlier where this idea, excuse me, planning and zoning, and Mr. Ferber's development and a fire truck being required with the implication that's going to be required here. That was a different time and a different ordinance. The ordinance has been changed. And related to that, in terms of building height, bonus density, the town ordinance does allow additional 5 feet, and that's, we have gone beyond that. Gene didn't approve anything beyond that. And also, the town had considered in Gene's position, realizing the elevation of the property, it's lower down. So there's going to be less impact in terms of adding additional height. Its natural grade is going to be lower than everything that's surrounding it. So the additional 5 feet, even if granted under other bonus requirements, the layout of the property itself is conducive to that additional 5 feet in height. Regarding the well, let's take them one at a time since they're up there. It's been argued today that under 16.04A, that the first 6 are required. The ordinance is what it is. It says if applicable, I'll take number 4 first. If applicable, estimate the number of employees. As my client stated here, these are parcels going to be sold off. There's no estimate of employees because it's going to be sold. For what would be or could be retained management companies in place. Also in hospitality, a lot of these services are 1099. So employees in and of itself weren't contemplated with the development plan and project. The form as provided to us, we don't control. If these are requirements under the code, we take the form as is. If this is something that's required, the town can take its initiative and update its form and saying, okay, here's 6 items, you've got to provide this and what's in there. But as Jared has gone through the number 2 and number 3, the narrative, the description, understanding of the project is part of the application. And it's been well understood from the 2019 initial approval by the town council, as well as the 2020 and 2021 permits. The narrative, the development plan, what's going in place, it's been there. As to number 5, the estimate of time construction. It's identified in phases, but again, at this point, what could have been estimated at the time of application, my client would love to have this done years ago, but here we are in 2023, still working through it.
When you say that is addressed in the conditional use permit, the proposed draft of the permit,
It was addressed there as well.
or it doesn't say, it actually says there's no time limitation
It gives a time limitation for when a permit is pulled.
from when it starts.
For that
From when the
particular
permit is
phase.
pulled, but not to be completed, yes.
And it's probably worth pointing out, and this is where the recitals could have done better at pointing out, is that between 2019 and 2021 and this permit, there was already the infrastructure placed. Like we had already done the work to, there's an 8-inch water line.
So is it your opinion that by doing the access road and bringing utilities through the overall development, stubbing it into these parcels, like what I'm gonna call parcel 7. Are you saying that is the commencement of construction?
Yeah, cause like, cause to my understanding is they're trying to say, hey, we need to know if you're gonna really start this, if this is gonna be a real project.
Or do you
And
think
between all those permits, we've already put an 8-inch water line partway through parcel 7 that will eventually connect to 100 South. And we've already put some irrigation line through, we've already stubbed sewer to, and so on.
what about completion?
Completion, we define as happening as building permits are pulled. And when those building permits are pulled, there's a time frame for completion that we wrote into that.
Keep going through that list, Mr. Akins.
Well, I feel like it's been addressed collectively, and the only one we could address, I haven't addressed, but I think Jared just spoke to, and that's the utilities, whether it's already in place. It's already in process, the permits have been pulled, it's on file already. So the way the zoning administrator is processing that is, if we already have it, we're not gonna ask for it again, because it's already been either through prior permits or conditional use permit or building permit in terms of the utility improvements.
Sorry to be too informal, Mr. Garati, is that accurate?
Can you have it restate, sorry?
Well, he was saying that if utility plans were already on record from prior permits, or because it's already been installed, you don't ask for it again in an application.
That is correct. That's standard practice in the building, even building inspectors, if a change is not substantial enough to warrant it, it's not required.
Yeah, and I don't have any other comments on those 6 items that are shall. There was issue raised in terms of the flood zone and density. The reality is a flood zone may be designated, but under FEMA work can be done to mitigate those designations, where you can modify, suspend that flood zone or its treatment hub. Here, the decision has been, okay, let's cluster together and preserve those open spaces, so we're not going into those sensitive areas and modify. But certainly a landowner can approach FEMA and modify and adjust those flood zone designations. So that in and of itself isn't a fixed hard and fast way to evaluate. Does it apply to the town's calculations just because it's in a zoning designation? As we look at what's been addressed today, I've heard a lot of what I would call alleged technical violations, but I don't see the connection by the appellants, and it's their burden. How will these technical violations be rolled in their harm? Because there isn't. As we look at this, the application, the process has been followed, its functions as the town ordinance is put out there. And certainly we can understand people that may disagree with it, but it's been done in a lawful, thoughtful, diligent, and thought out process. As we consider the arbitrary and capricious standard or legal standard, none of that applies. It just falls short of that Lincoln claim that it's under those 3 categories. So as we look at this, the other argument is that this should be overturned because the application came in after the permit was signed. And I think today's testimony clarifies the record on that point, that beginning December 5th, there was discussions and an appropriate process by the zoning administrator to go through and make sure these issues are addressed before we move the application stage to simplify and make sure everything's addressed appropriately before final applications in place. They were there, it was submitted due to circumstances on December 22nd in terms of power and staff can be available. We acknowledged that it was in the mayor's hands, mayor gave it back, and then at a later time to get it to the staff's hand. That wasn't done until the evening on January 5th. But any of those technical violations, they have been cured and addressed. The due process issues haven't been violated. Everybody's had an opportunity to look at this. Again, we don't have a technical violation resulting in a specific harm. to somebody that's other than just, or at an issue that's not a member of the general public. Again, the level 1, level 2 argument, I think that's been addressed, but simply there is a wide level of discretion under the current ordinance where the zoning administrator can make that decision, and there has not been a fact to show on the record why that discretion has been used. There's been adequate information and testimony given today that he is aware of the project, there's records on file from the infrastructure, utilities, power studies, transportation. Mr. Grotti's been involved with this process for years and years. He's suddenly going to come in on this on December of 22 without a working knowledge, and there has been information available to the public. As we look at this, again, there's real effects by the decisions that are being made today, and we appreciate the town council being mindful and taking a significant amount of time, not only today, but before and after to consider this. But this is something that boils down to lives and families of individuals, just not for Mr. Westphal, but those that are employed, engaged today and in the future. This has a significant financial impact to the town and has provided and will provide significant revenue, so this town can meet its obligations and provide well for the infrastructure, health, safety, and maintenance of this town for its citizens. Holding this up, literally hold up a pending sale. If this changes, the existing buyer has the right to walk away under its due diligence rights under that contract. So there's real consequences as to what's happening here.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see.
I do have a question. I want to go back to your discussion about standing and state definition, in particular, the section about suffering and damage, different than the whole community. I want to see what your response is to this scenario. If you're in Salt Lake City and you're building this project in and around Salt Lake City, so obviously the wind blowing the dust would affect the surrounding neighbors. In that particular scenario, they would have a harm significantly different than the whole community in Salt Lake City, correct?
If you're talking Salt Lake City, city boundaries or the valley itself, yeah, you could have a potential different impact.
Either way, yeah, maybe just in the city, something different impact. Take that same scenario and put it in Hanksville. Small, very small town. In that particular case, then the whole town's affected, those individuals are affected. And they're harmed, same as they would be in Salt Lake City, but by the fact that it's a small town, they have no right to do that. Correct?
I will answer it differently. I understand the hypothetical, but this harm, the harm that's being considered here doesn't stay temporary. It doesn't stay permanent. Really what we're looking at is these conditional use permits are not things or permanent conditions. What's being raised here is a temporary construction situation. We could have a project that is done and completed with dust issues for 1 month versus a project that's a temporary condition for 10 years. So in and of itself, it does, I don't think is a condition of the land, I mean, what I would call an encumbrance that affects the land or the community. What dust is a temporary construction issue that should be addressed under a building permit, not necessarily a conditional use permit damage.
Paul, furthermore on that, if I'm developing a sanctuary, for instance, and Mother Nature is doing its thing, I'm required to mitigate as good as I can for what I can within reason. But when Mother Nature, like last summer, was doing what it was doing, Sanctuary City doesn't hold me liable for what Mother Nature does. But we have had dust mitigation out there and we have worked hard to do it. But when you have gusts of 30 to 80 mile an hour winds, The city isn't relying Paulson saying, hey, you're responsible to make sure you can deal with evaporation at 109 degrees and 80-mile-an-hour winds. So we have on our project mitigated tests, and we will continue to do so.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I could keep going on because I could then say, well, what about the traffic and that, we're getting far ahead to my hypothetical, so I just wanted to see what your response is.
Let's go ahead at this point in time and allow the appellants to make a rebuttal. I would say, it is 4:10. But we need some time to deliberate. So if we could kind of keep the rebuttals to about 10 to 15 minutes tops on both sides. I appreciate it. So, appellants, whatever you'd like to address in rebuttal.
I'm gonna just go real quick. I have a couple of things. I find it interesting that the copy that we received on the application for the appeal didn't have any of the, county only part filled out, but the one that was in your packet is now completely filled out. So that happened at some point, I don't know when, but I thought that was interesting.
You mean that
The one that I received when I walked into the room had all of this filled out, and it also had the back part filled out as the acknowledgement of agreement of additional professional costs. That was not, none of that was done before when we actually got our.
could that be an error in the production?
I'm just saying that when we received it, the day we went in with our grammar request, none of that was filled out. Now this packet shows it as being filled out. That's just interesting to me.
And I know that the dates are also changed,
And all the dates are all changed.
but it does, that it's,
I'm not seeing
this one here in our packet. Has a different date, but the dates are noted that it was different, we don't have the dates to point that on it.
Originally, none of that was filled out when we received that. Just a point. And I'd have to say that this project has changed quite a bit over time. In 2019, the original conditional use permit, so I can't recall. And now, language changed quite a bit. You made the comment that the conditional use permit was approved by the mayor and the attorney. By December 22nd, I believe you said that. And I don't have, there's no evidence to say that that's true.
No, he's referring to a letter that was issued by the mayor to Mr. Garati telling him that all future conditions
Be approved by the mayor and the city attorney.
Okay, so this one didn't.
Not
Yeah.
this one.
Okay. And then as far as going and decimating all of the property, I was concerned that that happened that way because you would think under, I'm a civil engineer. I've been through many, many projects. And if your project is going to continue for 7 or 8 years, whatever, typically you do it in a phasing mechanism where you only go in and do a partial destruction of an area in order to start your groundwork. So I don't know if I agree with the fact that you had to go all and take out all of the property is really a legitimate thing. You could have done that differently. The other thing I want to point out is you keep talking about this state-of-the-art bioreactor that you're going to put in. Is that actually been installed? Jerry? Okay, I'm saying that it hasn't been installed. Maybe you can correct me.
He can address that on his rebuttal.
Okay, that's fine. And however, there are several TPs and covered wagons and Kivas that are installed on the project already, constructed and in use. And so I'm wondering what is the wastewater system that they are using? Is it just a typical underground wastewater system? Does it go to this state-of-the-art bioreactor? You know, because that to me is one of the parts of the project where you promise these things, but that really hasn't occurred. That's all I can.
Mr. Campbell?
Right, got a lot of notes, but I'm gonna try and keep it short. First, I'd like to address the standing on HB 388. I appreciate if you'd also send me that detail, because that bill's 2,459 pages.
That's what I'm saying.
And I've been searching for something about standing, I'm seeing nothing. I find all the appeals in there, but I'm finding nothing that discusses standing changes. So if you'd send me that, I appreciate it. So
Well, and I limited to ask, normally what happens is when a bill is passed and enacted, there are codifiers like West and Lexis who will go through and they will offer annotations
Right.
with legislative history behind it, and they'll scour through
Yeah.
hundreds of pages and put the most important things. And I only asked him, I don't need a summary of the 1400, but just tell me any key legislative history. If we can understand from it that this wasn't the intent of the legislature was to expressly overturn the public interest doctrine.
Okay, thank you. I have the same concerns. One thing that Gene Wright said is that in his statement, when he asked if he complied with Hulu, his answer was he does the best he can. I don't think that's the standard for following the law. The best you can, you know, I'm sorry, officer, I didn't realize I was going 80 miles an hour in a school zone. I was doing the best I can. You know, that doesn't hold water. I'm expected to obey the speed limit, correct? So, I mean, I think that's a typical response of what I see happening is we're not following the town ordinance. I will submit that I'm not as concerned about the dust and sand. I'm the HOA president of our HOA, and sand is a constant thorn in our side. We have no solutions really for it, but it is a constant irritant. But that's not the key thing. The key issue here is the town acting capriciously?
Let me ask you this while we're on, and I'll allow you to extend your time. But can you tell me what is the unique or distinguished interest that you're being adversely affected? Is there,
Good question.
from this is a standing question, obviously, and I want to understand, is there something unique to you and Ms. McCown that is different than other residents? And do you think that statute somehow identifies if there's like a level of intensity, a difference in intensity? But help me understand what is unique, because I think you just said that all of Desert Gardens has. Okay, sorry. Are you in Desert Gardens?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, sorry. I assume, you didn't say where you were the HOA president. I just assumed
I
that
did.
you guys were neighbors. And I apologize for assuming, but my question is, okay, so what is the distinguishable interest?
The traditional standing standard, the second one is that the dispute raises an issue of significant public importance. If the town is not required to follow their own ordinances, they should be held accountable.
I get that, but how is I'm talking about the state statute, the new one that's been.
I don't like
So how are you, yes, can I, yes, go ahead.
That's the-
So how are you different than I am, that lives up in Pocketville Road, that Roddy is, that lives in 101? How are you impacted differently from other people that live in your town?
I think that's a fair question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, I'm not sure that it's relevant, but I think it's a fair question. I'll tell you one reason I'm distinctly concerned about the issue of the town following the ordinances is because we have several developments in our immediate vicinity. Behind us on the hill with Bell Mesa, they applied to put a hotel up there. They applied for HRZ zoning. When it was threatened with a referendum, they withdrew the ordinance. When we have another appeal hearing or another request, I believe is coming up on the town council meeting, that is a application by Alan Lee to have HRZ zoning on the property immediately adjacent to Rio de Sion.
It's already been granted.
So
I'm
I
concerned.
was certainly the same question.
And the zoning, the ordinance for the zoning specifies that the HRZ zone is from 700 east to the town border. Alan's property goes to, to the next property, which is Quail Mesa. I don't want a hotel on the hill over top of our property by Alan Lee being able to get HRZ zone and then Quail Mesa coming back and applying for HRZ. The town has got to follow the ordinances. If it says that it can't go past 700 east, that's where it needs
Let
to
me
stop.
rephrase that a little bit more, not the town, but how does Weeping Buffalo development impact you different than it does me in Pocketville, or it does you in your place, or Gene in 101, or somebody else living in a different part of town?
I almost feel that most of my concern is not with Weeping Buffalo, it's with the town of Virgin for not following their own ordinances. And I'm sorry if I wasn't clear in that, but that is absolutely
Wanted to make sure.
my concern, overriding concern, because they're entitled to develop their property.
Yeah.
And they're required to follow the ordinances that are in existence, and they didn't apply for it correctly either. I also found another thing in that same section, thank you for bringing it up, sorry. Let me, that I think is kind of important. It states in clause F, which I never really paid attention to before, it said level 1 CUP review. The zoning administrator will review the application for a level 1 CUP with the applicant according to the general review criteria, the general standards for conditional uses, any applicable specific conditional use standards set forth in this section or else in blue. I question the validity or the order of all the documents. When records are not kept contemporaneously, I question the validity of all the documents supporting that. But it also says in paragraph 2B, the zoning administrator may require more documentation, studies, or information for a review person. Maybe he didn't need it. And C, is determined that added conditions will not be able to properly mitigate adverse effects of the proposed use and therefore deny the CUP, the level 1 CUP. All findings of adverse effect and lack of mitigation options will be submitted in writing by the zoning administrator to the town clerk to go in the applicant's file. Nothing is in the applicant file about any of the adverse conditions or the mitigation.
That's a question that I have for you too. You've heard testimony today from the zoning administrator, from the permittee, that there was significant discussion. Is it your argument that the lack of written documentation of that is grounds that there's not substantial evidence in the record?
There may be now. There wasn't on December 22nd.
Okay.
And there wasn't on January the 5th. But there might be now. I'm not saying the file has been doctored, but
And the record includes what is testimony given today. You appreciate that, right?
I appreciate that, and also I want to point out that a land use authority's decision is arbitrary or capricious only if it has not been supported by substantial evidence in the record. There's no substantial evidence in the record. So my argument is.
That's why I'm asking, in writing, are you saying that it has to be in writing, or can it not be oral? Because we just have evidence that was provided today at the hearing.
In determining whether substantial evidence supports the city council's decision, we would consider all the evidence in the record, both favorable and contrary, and determine whether a reasonable mind could reach the is not supported by substantial evidence. If you could tell me who could make a reasonable decision based upon the way this application was filed on January 5th, the way it was filed, and that's the town record. I'll buy you dinner.
I have,
That's not right.
I,
Going to cut off at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and we're gonna be done, we're gonna be done by.
one thing I would like to say is that the White Bison has been allowed to access their property with one egress and ingress. And I think that we have been treated unfairly, me in particular, in Rio de Zion, or in, I don't even know where I live now, Desert Gardens. Because we are forced in that small project to have two entrances, one of which is in the main entrance of our town. And I really think that we were not treated, I wasn't treated fairly.
So, April, let me, you heard my question to Lauren, same question to you. How is this development impacting you differently than it is impacting somebody living in Pocketville or somebody living out in 101?
Well, I think that for the safety of the town, because we at Desert Gardens in that development are required to have.
No, just you as an individual, how's it affecting you differently than, well, I guess it would be Desert Gardens too, but I'm sorry. to
I
interrupt.
just, I am being treated unfairly, I believe, because certain things that are allowed there are impacting me because of the way that they have been allowed in our development. And I don't think that, I think that I haven't been treated fairly as an individual, because that project has been allowed certain variances, which we have not been allowed in Desert Gardens.
I'd like to make one more closing comment, one more.
Sounds good. Make it.
I don't really want to pick a fight with Weeping Buffalo. They're entitled to build their project. I'm concerned with the way the decision was made. Did it obey town law? Does it obey town ordinance? Gene Karate is a member of the town council. If he didn't want to follow the town ordinance, why didn't he bring it up and try and get the town council to adapt it to something that was more to his liking? Chief Justice Warren Berger made a quote that I think is very relevant in this thing. He was the U.S. Supreme Court for 40 years ago. People in an open society do not demand infallibility from their institutions, but it is difficult for them to accept what they are prohibited from observing. This was all done in a backroom deal, not invisible to the public, and this is the largest project in Virgin history. Why would the largest project in Virgin history not be subject to a level 2 review? It was done in public. Thank you very much for indulging me.
Mr. Eakins.
We will keep it to the point and brief. I've asked the clerk to pull up the conditional use permit that was noticed on December 22nd. There's been a repeated notice more around the 27th, I believe.
I was on
29th. Oh, excuse me, 29th. Yeah, December 29th. I apologize. Thanks for correcting that. So this is the website through the Utah Public Notice, and the town requires the permit is submitted, it's published.
When it's issued, it's.
Yes, I'll accept this. Is it has issued, then it's the notice period with any objections that can be raised, which is why we're here today. So it was published on December 29th. And as we click on that, it shows the conditional use permit. It's been repeatedly stated that the record was inadequate. How could you evaluate it? This provides the detail. This is the permit. The document we see before us is the design conditional use permit. Click on. It was just bringing all the suspense and get it really focused on what it is.
And it's just slowly, it's growing.
So here you'll find the information under the CAL requirements in our It has the development plan, drawings. As we go further on, so this is the conditional use permit. parcels. Yeah. So what was published is the permit itself, not necessarily the application, but the permit itself.
Okay, I want to see the exhibits. Legal description, 7.8.
And again, clustering, tied in open space, parcel 9, that's described.
And you're indicating, your testimony was, even though this is 19 acres, your internal governing documents allocates 4 acres of that 19?
I believe it's 4.5, we'd have to verify that, but you'll see that is a note in the maps.
Okay, Chris, keep.
You flip that.
No.
Okay.
That's the overall, all
Okay,
parcels.
next one, is that the individual one? Okay,
That's the end of it.
And that's just for parcel 7.
okay. And then. Floor plan.
Concept drawings.
Okay. Those elevations. I
Oh,
can't tell.
the different.
For the fence.
Okay. Keep going. That's it? Oh, signage. Oh. Okay. Keep going. Is that it? Okay, appreciate it. Okay, go ahead. Luke.
So they can't create or print that off, but just the record reflected December 29 published notice included with the minute. Though there's been claims it was not part of the application.
So the application and getting in there was just getting it there because it was to our knowledge, our first opportunity to have the office back open from between the holidays. The notice was already provided and was published. As far as a couple other questions on the sewer, there is currently a working septic system that is well under the 1 unit per acre requirement for the overall 80 acres. The bioreactor is sitting on site and is scheduled to be installed over the next few months. And we just worked with Ash Creek and the health department. Did everything we were supposed to do to get the current units there on that. Septic system is being phased out as soon as what I believe is called an Aquatech system is installed. And so that's in process.
When you say bioreactor, I think of like a nuclear.
It's just taking human waste and making it's not just a septic, it's better than the Arango system, it's a mini treatment system. As far as ingress egress on the project, there are 2 ingress egresses off of the highway. The new one that we put in, which was the old driveway for the home, 400 west. There's 300 west, and we have gated it as an emergency ingress egress, but it is available in case of emergency.
Will it continue to be gated, or as you open up phases further down, will it eventually be opened?
300 we intend to keep gated. We want to be polite to those neighbors and force the traffic through 400 west unless there's an emergency. There's also an ingress egress specifically for parcel 7 through 100 south. That will also be a gated emergency ingress egress only. And then there's an additional ingress egress on Water Street.
Have you had that reviewed by the fire district as being sufficient?
We-
I know ingress and egress is creature fire code, and what they consider to be dual ingress. And crash gate can't satisfy it in.
We asked for a crash gate and were denied. We asked for a crash gate on one of the entrances.
Was the fire district created by then?
Yes.
It was.
Yes, but I've never seen any documentation from the fire district that says.
That's it, if you find a fire district on that one. Go ahead.
Just my point is, we have been working with the fire district and through the process, making sure that we have secondary ingress egress to the point that we have 4.
My last comment is has been noted, the difference between, applications, signatures, office staff. There was essentially an effort to cure those deficiencies. That's what was going on in terms of going back, making sure the application was signed and initial. That's why you see the different dates. It's an effort to cure and address those, differences between the documents.
Okay. We appreciate everyone's input today. At this point in time, does the council want to move into an executive session to discuss and deliberate, or what would you like to do? We need to do it. I mean, we're gonna come back.
We're probably gonna take it under advisement, even though we need an executive session, because I want to see.
Yeah.
There's a couple other things.
But so I think we want to just inform them today that there'll be no decision that we'll take it under advisement. We want to make. Well, yeah, we want to make a motion, please.
But, and I would like to see a time frame, Mr. Akins, when you provide that document, kind of, but we have a due date. We can extend it, but.
Well, you need
Okay.
Because I think we should go into our executive session for people, because it has.
Okay, well, then make a motion.
He made a motion, and I would like to make a friendly motion that we wait until after our discussions.
After our discussion in private.
Yes,
and
that our executive session to finalize that decision.
But, so I missed what was the motion. What was,
Keith, go ahead.
oh, his earlier motion.
Yeah, you have to act on my earlier, that's feedback.
We defer.
I believe we've asked the permittees council to provide us with some additional little briefing on the legislative intent of the ordinance that your motion is based off of. Are you willing to, should we just indicate so that we don't prolong this? I know time is of the essence for everybody, that we take the matter under advisement. And that the motion, I would say, could request that he produce it by Monday or Tuesday of next week. And then we will convene. When is our next council meeting?
Mr. So, I'd like to request that I also provided a copy of that 388
Absolutely.
brief, and that I have an opportunity to respond to it with my own research.
Absolutely.
Because I don't have any idea what it is.
Okay, we're gonna have Mr. Akins provide that to us by Monday, and we want a response from you. If we gave him till when's our next meeting?
21st.
It's Tuesday, the 21st.
Yeah, we're gonna need your response, any response you wanna make to it by Thursday, whatever Thursday is, the Thursday before our council meeting.
That should be next week. That'll be.
Let's include that in the motion. So motion to take the matter under advisement. Yeah, I'd like Leroy, if you could make that motion just simply because, and we're gonna take even your motion under advisement. That may, obviously that's gonna play a role in the ultimate decision.
Okay, I move that we take my motion under advisement in executive committee, and we also take under advisement the information that been provided to us by, what's the terminology?
By a supplemental brief, to be provided by the committee by Monday and by the appellant in response by Thursday.
And a copy of that supplemental brief be provided to the appeal.
Yeah. We have a second on that motion.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, I will turn it back to Leroy to adjourn us.
Are we going to executive committee or
Well, we're waiting. Yeah, we're done today.
Can I have a point of clarification on that? Yeah. I think you said that the 388 was due by Monday, and then you said
Yours by.
by Thursday. You mean the 21st or the 16th?
16.
16th.
16.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
He's
Today's
I'm okay
Friday,
with
he's
that.
gonna have about 3 days to do his, and I'm thinking 3 days.
I'm okay
after
with
that
that.
for you.
Just want to clarify.
And then any response you give to us, you make sure you send it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we need to set a date for our next meeting?
We're having one on the 21st, so I think what you were saying, we'll go into executive session after the meeting.
We're gonna have an executive session before.
We could do that.
That would be a lot more.
Yeah, the meeting goes at 2 o'clock.
It would make sure it happened in the second.
You guys wanna pick that date?
Okay, can you come at night, so she doesn't miss work?
4:30, Monday through Thursday.
What about next Friday?
Happy after, technically it's supposed to be 2, I don't think it's 4 hours. So I will not be here next Monday. And so.
Well, we can.
Has to be after, it has to be
That's the end of the one.
after 10:30.
So you want to do it Tuesday?
Tuesday for a council meeting. No, we're just trying to, it's gonna be, we're gonna have a long council meeting, so.
How about the 16th?
The month,
That's the night they, that's. the
Well,
day
but
they-
that's-
Set it that time for us to.
We will have it, you'll have it submitted by the 16th.
Yeah.
Thursday night.
Thursday night, the 16th. So 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock here. I need to have it before 5 o'clock.
Okay, you can discuss it later. So, so we want to make a motion that we have a special meeting.
And there's a meeting on February 16th at 5 o'clock.
we'll go in that, we'll open the regular meeting and we'll go in this. I'll have to make a motion and go in the closed session.
We have a second on that motion.
Second,
All in favor?
I
Okay, Leroy.
make a motion, we close the meeting.
Okay.
I've got to make sure I'm hearing it. No, I'm standing right on. I'm gonna go to one time.
I'm working on 4 buildings.